Chapter 833. Gentlemen, do you have a name card for me to hand in? The gatekeeper of the Zheng residence was very polite. He didn't look like he was going to let them in or announce their arrival. Today there was a joyous occasion in the residence and many important people had come. They couldn't just go and inform everyone that came. Only a good gatekeeper who could help the master choose when to meet and who not to meet and when to meet was a good gatekeeper. The last gatekeeper had let someone in who shouldn't have been, and that was why he was kicked out by the madam. Li Yi held Zheng Zimo's hand and said calmly, "You just have to go in and tell Master Zheng that an old friend from Willow Alley is here to visit." He already knew about the changes that had happened to the Zheng family over the past decade, but he was still not very clear about the inside story. Zimo didn't want to admit that she was a member of the Zheng family and didn't want to call Xianxia's second uncle. She must have her reasons, so he naturally had to let her be. The gatekeeper smiled and said, "Gentlemen, I'm really sorry, but my master is busy today. Why don't you come another day?" No name card meant that they weren't important people. The two were so young and they didn't even say who they were. They only said they were old friends. Old friends. It was obvious that they had heard that their master had been promoted and wanted to use connections. If it was any other day he would still go in to inform them just in case. But today was different. If he dampened the mood of the guests, he couldn't afford to be responsible as a lowly gatekeeper. Li Yi didn't come today to reason with the Zheng family, and there was no reason to. The Zheng family wouldn't give him what he wanted and he had to get it. Under such circumstances he had to rely on other means to solve the problem. Li Yi looked at the sloppy old man standing not far behind the two. The sloppy old man covered one side of his face and walked over with a slightly gloomy expression. His gloomy expression wasn't because he was being ordered around by Li Yi, but because one of his teeth was broken and half of his face was swollen. Naturally, it caused some emotional fluctuations. Is Miss back?" The sloppy old man didn't walk over, but an old voice suddenly came from inside the door. The voice was trembling and excited. When the gatekeeper saw him, he immediately bowed and said respectfully, "Housekeeper Ho." The old man called Steward Ho ignored him and quickly walked over. He looked at Zheng Zimo excitedly and said with a trembling voice, 13 years and 9 months. "Monsieur, you're finally back." Zheng Zimo looked at him and sighed after a long time. "Uncle Ho, congratulations on your promotion, Lord Zheng. With Lord Zheng's ability, your future career will definitely be smoother. This official will first propose a toast to Lord Zheng." "What are you talking about, Lord Lu? These are all groundless rumors." Xianxia clinked glasses with an official he was familiar with, and another voice came from the other side. "This is not groundless speculation. Lord Zheng's appointment letter has already been seen by someone. I reckon that the court will begin after the Lantern Festival at the latest. The earliest it will be announced will be during the Grand Court Conference. Come, let me also propose a toast to Lord Zheng." After Xianxia clinked glasses again, his body began to sway. Today, with these people coming to the residence, he had already drunk quite a bit. Normally, his tolerance for alcohol was only average, but at this moment he was almost at his limit. A woman dressed in luxurious clothing walked in from outside the door and held his arm. She turned her head and said apologetically, "Sirs, I am truly sorry. Lord Cui is hosting a banquet at Drunken Moon Pavilion tonight. Lord Qin and Lord Chen will also be there. At that time there will be some matters to discuss. My master really cannot drink anymore. Since this is the case, let's quickly let Lord Zheng rest. If something important is ruined, we cannot afford to bear the consequences. Yes, let's quickly let Lord Zheng rest." These people also knew what the surnames Cui, Qin and Qin represented, so they did not stop her. "This woman will not disturb the sirs." The woman looked at the two servant girls beside her and said, "Hurry and help the master to rest." "Yes." As soon as the woman walked out of the hall, a figure hurried over and whispered something in her ear. Hearing this, the woman's brows instantly furrowed. Didn't she already deny being a member of the Zheng family? Why is she causing trouble at this time? A trace of disgust appeared on her face as she said, "The master is already resting. Let's leave her for a while first. When the time comes, find a random reason to send her away." The servant immediately bowed and said yes. "Just a jinx. Does she really think she is still the young mistress of the Zheng family?" The woman murmured and left with a sullen expression. "Ever since I can remember, Uncle Ho has been taking care of all the chores in the family. Uncle Ho treated me very well back then. While the two were waiting in a side hall, Zheng Zimo looked at the old man standing at the door and whispered. The old man looked around and finally walked in with a smile on his face. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Miss, this gentleman is, I am her husband." Li Yi held her hand and looked at the old man with a smile. Zimo is indebted to Uncle Ho for taking care of me when I was young. Zheng Zimo blushed but didn't resist. She held his hand even tighter. The old man was startled when he heard this. He looked him up and down a few times before a smile appeared on his old face again. He said, "So it's the son-in-law. You're really a talented man. You're a perfect match for Miss." He looked at Li Yi for a while before a servant came in and said, "The master is drunk and is resting in his room. If you want to see the master, wait for him to wake up or come back tomorrow." Drunk? Li Yi shook his head and said, "It seems that Lord Tsing is really in high spirits. He's not at the Ministry of Revenue's Yamen at this time, but is actually drinking and having fun at home. He hasn't even become the capital governor yet." The servant was startled and then said angrily, "What did you say? All right, you can leave." Steward Ho waved his hand at him. The servant wanted to say something but could only swallow his anger and leave after being glared at by the steward. Steward Ho finally looked at Li Yi and said in a small voice, "Son-in-law, this is the Zheng residence. Be careful with your words, careful with your words." "Careful with what words? Where is Tsing Shichen? I would like to ask, is this how he usually serves the court as an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue?" Zheng Zimo pulled on Li Yi's sleeve as soon as he took a step forward. She looked at him and shook her head, then turned to Steward Ho and asked, "Uncle Ho, can we take a walk around the residence?" The old man nodded. "This is the Zheng residence, of course you can. However, the residence has changed greatly. Let me lead the young mistress and son-in-law." A quarter of an hour later, in front of a courtyard in the Zheng residence. Zheng Zimo stood in front of the courtyard door for a long time before asking, "Uncle Ho, can we go in?" Apart from the maids and servants who clean regularly, the master usually does not allow anyone to enter. The old man hesitated for a moment before saying, "But since it is the young mistress, I believe that even if the master knew, he would not blame you." "Thank you, Uncle Ho." Zheng Zimo smiled faintly at the old man. She reached out her hand and the courtyard door creaked open. Li Yi followed her inside. No matter how he looked at it, this was just an ordinary courtyard with nothing out of the ordinary. There was a stone table and chairs in the courtyard, and a swing hanging from a tree on the left side of the wall. The table and chairs were spotless. She walked over and touched them with her hand, surveying her surroundings. Finally, she walked under the swing. "This is where father, mother, and I used to live." She sat on the swing and said, "There's also this swing. My father tied it up for me. One time I swung too high and fell from it. My father put the swing away. I begged him for a long time before he agreed. But this swing is no longer the same as the one from before. And here there's half a tile missing, but it's still the same. Look here, this is the name I carved on the tree when I was young. Unfortunately, it's been a long time and I can't see it clearly anymore. Here, this brick can actually be taken down. When I was young, I hid things inside and father and mother did not know. She really did take down the brick in the corner. Actually, it was only half a brick, so there was a small space inside. She took out a yellowed paper bag from inside. The paper bag was torn apart and there was some black residue inside. The words Suji Worldwide Commerce could be faintly seen on the paper bag. She stood up, clapped her hands and murmured, "This place is exactly the same as before." Li Yi held her hand and asked, "Do you like it here?" She nodded slightly and said softly, "Coming here, I remembered many things from the past." "As long as you like it." Li Yi nodded, looked around and murmured, "As long as you like it." Chapter 834. When the two walked out of the yard, Zheng Zimo looked around again and asked the old man, "Uncle Ho, the garden in the back?" The old man nodded and said, it's there, it's exactly the same as before." She held on to Li Yi's hand, a look of reminiscence on her face. "That garden is where we used to play hide and seek when we were young. I know a place where once hidden, no one can find it no matter how hard they try." As they walked in the direction of the garden, she said with some regret, "Unfortunately, it's winter now. If we wait until summer when the leaves are the densest, it would be the best place to play hide and seek." Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's okay, then we'll play in summer. Besides, it's our home so we can play whenever we want." She shook her head and said, That was before. Li looked around and murmured, "It will be the same in the future. Congratulations, Zijian. Master Zeng has been promoted to the capital governor and is also the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. This is rare even in the previous 2 dynasties. It's my father who was promoted, it has nothing to do with me." Zijian just likes to be humble. That's not right. Master Zeng's career is smooth, and the Zeng family's status in the capital will naturally rise. Zijian, perhaps your matter will also be loosened. In the stone pavilion in the center of the garden, screens were erected on all 4 sides to block out the cold. A large stove was lit in the center of the stone pavilion, and there was a copper pot on top of the stove. Boiling water bubbled in the pot. Several young people around the stove put meat and vegetables into the pot to cook, chatting as they ate. The screens blocked out the cold outside and wrapped in the heat inside, so there was no cold inside at all. Zeng Zijian picked up the wine warmed in the small stove and took a sip. He shook his head and said, "It's not easy to overturn an edict personally issued by the current emperor. I don't want to become an official anymore. There's nothing wrong with being a good-for-nothing young master waiting to die." The young man on his left dipped a mouthful of mutton and comforted him. "Zijian, don't be discouraged. In at least a year, at most 2 or 3 years, this decree will be nullified. It's not like you don't know His Majesty's health. How long do you think he can hold on? Lord Zeng is now highly promoted and will definitely be highly regarded by the King of Shu in the future. When that time comes, Zijian's matters will only require a word from His Highness." Zeng Zijian glanced at him and said, "Brother Han, be careful with your words." The young man said disapprovingly, "This is the Zeng family, your territory. Zijian, you're too cowardly. Is there anyone who can hear us?" He shook his head and dipped another mouthful of mutton. Then he smacked his lips and said, "It's said that this thing called hot pot was created by that Li. Tell me, as a county marquis and a minister of Jinzi Guanglu, why does he like these crooked ways instead of doing proper work?" Just as he finished speaking, a corner of the screen was lifted up to reveal a passage. Li poked half of his body in and said with a frown, "I can pretend that I didn't hear what you said earlier about His Majesty not having 2 years to live, but don't you think it's a little too much to say such things while eating hot pot?" Li looked at Zeng Zijian and asked, "Young Master Zeng, what do you think?" "Pot. Why are you here?" The wine pot in Zeng Zijian's hand fell to the ground and his expression changed drastically. As for that young Master Han, his face turned from white to green and then to white again. The words, "Just now you said that His Majesty doesn't have 2 years to live," echoed in his mind. He suddenly stood up from his seat. If these words were to reach His Majesty's ears, no matter what position the Han family held in the imperial court, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to exterminate them. Plang. Because he stood up too abruptly, his thigh bumped into the stove. The copper pot on the stove shook violently before it toppled over. The boiling hot soup splashed everywhere. Then there were a few ear-piercing screams of terror. The screens on the 4 sides were knocked down by the people and fell to the ground. When the copper pot rolled down, Li simply turned around and grabbed Miss Zeng by the waist. With a light leap, he landed under the pavilion. With a soft body in his arms, Li looked at the people who ran out of the pavilion with ferocious expressions and took off their shoes and jumped on the spot. He sighed and said, "Although hot pot is delicious, the water is so hot. You have to be careful when eating it." The screams quickly attracted the guards of the Zeng residence. A middle-aged woman hurried over from behind. After seeing Zeng Zijian's pained expression, her expression changed and she hurriedly said, "Zijian, what's wrong? What happened?" Zeng Zijian clenched his teeth and looked at Li with frightened eyes. He shook his head and said, "No, it's nothing. I just accidentally knocked over the soup pot. Mother, don't worry. Stay here and don't move." The woman said to him, then turned around and said to the guards sternly, "Why are you still standing here? Quick, go get the doctor." In addition to Zeng Zijian, 3 other people were drenched by the boiling water. However, it was only a slight burn and some flesh pain. Apart from being temporarily unable to move, they were fine. Seeing that Zeng Zijian was fine, the middle-aged woman stood up and glanced in a certain direction. She strode over and looked at Zeng Zimo with a frown. "What are you doing here?" Zeng Zimo grasped Li's hand and walked out. She looked at the middle-aged woman and said calmly, "I'm here to take back my parents' spirit tablet." "Spirit tablet?" The middle-aged woman pouted. "Your parents are sinners of the Zeng family. They brought shame to the ancestors of the Zheng family and let their spirit tablet occupy a corner of the ancestral hall. What are you dissatisfied with? Li Yi felt her grip on his hand was a bit tight, so he gently patted the back of her hand. My father was framed by someone, Yi Zichen said. Zheng Zimo looked at her and said word by word, you have already expelled him from the Zheng family. He is no longer a member of the Zheng family. Now I am going to take back their spirit tablet. The middle-aged woman sneered. I wonder if your dead parents would want their spirit tablet to be placed in the ancestral hall of the Zheng family or in the hands of a dirty prostitute. Li Yi suddenly felt a stinging pain on the back of his hand. It was because her nails had sunk into the flesh of his hand. It's okay, I will take care of it. He stepped forward, shielding her behind him. He turned around and whispered. The middle-aged woman was startled and frowned. What are you? Xianxia is quite smart. Why did he marry a thing like you? Li Yi looked at the middle-aged woman and shook his head. You, slap. As soon as the middle-aged woman opened her mouth, a loud sound was heard, followed by a burning pain on one side of her face. This slap is for what you said just now. Slap. As the middle-aged woman froze in place, her face full of disbelief, Li Yi flipped his hand again. This slap is because you scolded me earlier. Let me correct you, I am Li Yi, not. Li Yi stopped in time. After thinking about it, he looked at her with dissatisfaction. You still want to play tricks with me? Slap. Another crisp slap rang out. This slap is a trick. Chapter 835. In fact, Li Yi himself did not like to slap faces. The effect of force was mutual, equal in magnitude and opposite in direction, acting on the same straight line. From a physical point of view, this was an act of hurting the enemy 1,000 times while hurting oneself 1,000 times. He disliked hitting women even more. Hitting women was a sign of a man's incompetence. However, for some people who were extremely hateful, so hateful that people ignored their gender, a loss was a loss. He had to be happy and clear his mind. In fact, he wanted to lose a few thousand more, but he was held back by drunken Mo. She looked up at Li Yi and shook her head slightly. Li Yi nodded and said, Don't worry, we are here to reason things out today. Li Yi. Xing Zijian looked at him fiercely and a beast-like growl came from his throat. Li Yi raised his hand and pressed down saying, Don't move, you are still injured. He had only used ordinary strength when he slapped the middle-aged woman just now. Otherwise her face would not have been so simply swollen. But even so, it was enough for her to freeze on the spot and not come back to her senses for a long time. You dare to hit me? When the blankness in her eyes became clear, the middle-aged woman looked at him in disbelief and said in a trembling voice. This was the Zheng family and she was the mistress of the Zheng family. How could she be slapped 3 times by an outsider in front of so many people? Li Yi said politely, Each of these 3 slaps is reasonable. If Madam feels that you are still unclear about which slap and feel wronged, I can explain it to you again. The middle-aged woman stretched out her hand and pointed at him tremblingly. She said to the remaining 2 guards, Catch him, catch him. Just as the 2 guards were about to move, a burst of noisy footsteps came from behind. Tsong, what's wrong with you? Why is your face so pale? Mingdao, what's wrong with your foot? Go Xing, you guys. A few men hurried over from behind. When they saw the young men wailing in pain or with twisted expressions, their expressions immediately changed and they asked with concern. This was especially so for a middle-aged man with the surname Han. When he saw his son's pale face, trembling body and the obvious smell of urine coming from his lower body, he could not suppress the anger on his face. He stood up abruptly and said angrily, Who did this? Who did this? Lord Han, you seem to be very free today. Li Yi smiled at the middle-aged man who had lost his composure. His smile was very kind, but in the eyes of Lord Han, it was no less than a demon. For some people in the capital, this was the smile of the devil. A smile from a demon could destroy a family if it was light, and exterminate an entire clan if it was heavy. Lord Li. Lord Han's legs turned to jelly and he sat back down. The other 2, who were just about to stick their bodies out, shrank back and turned their heads to look around, pretending to be enjoying the scenery in the garden. Li Yi had some impression of this Lord Han. He was the Minister of Revenue, and was considered the 2nd or 3rd most important person in the Han family of the capital. He was not familiar with the other 2. He looked at them and asked, These 2 lords are? The 2 of them knew that they couldn't hide anymore, so they immediately bowed. I am Feng Kuan, the Minister of Revenue. Greetings, Lord Li. I am Wei Jin, the Minister of Granaries. Greetings, Lord Li. No need to stand on ceremony, no need to stand on ceremony. Li Yi smiled and waved his hand. He asked, how was the banquet at the Zheng residence? Was it passable? The three couldn't figure out what this Lord Li meant. Lord Han immediately nodded and said, it was all right. It seems that Lord Zheng's hospitality is not bad. Li Yi nodded his head and asked, since you've eaten and drank, why don't you tell me why you're drinking and celebrating here before it's time to close the yamen? Could it be that the Ministry of Revenue's yamen has moved to Assistant Minister Zheng's fu? Hearing this, the three were speechless at the same time and cold sweat began to drip from their foreheads. Although there was a fixed time for the opening and closing of the yamen, it only needed to be done in the morning. As for when to close the yamen, it depended on the specific number of errands that each person had. This was a tacit practice that everyone agreed on. There were also some officials who did not work in the yamen. Therefore, if their superiors did not care, they could go home early or do some other things. However, this did not mean that they could drink and have fun during the normal court hours. This crime could be serious or minor. If it was a minor one, they would be fined. If it was a serious one, they would be demoted. But who knew that they would be caught by the minister of the imperial court while drinking in the Zheng mansion? Li, County Marquis Li. Xianxia walked over quickly with the help of a servant. Hearing that there was trouble in the mansion, he immediately sobered up a little. Seeing the two people standing in the courtyard, he squeezed out a smile on his face. Sumo, you're here too. Li shook his head. Lord Xing is really in a good mood, Lord. Seeing Xianxia coming, the middle-aged woman immediately burst into tears. Pointing at Li Yi and Xing Zumo, she said loudly, this prostitute brought her. Shut up. Xianxia's face suddenly showed anger. His almost roaring voice scared the woman to the spot. Looking at the woman's swollen cheek, he waved his hand and said, come, take the lady back. Then he looked at Li Yi and said, County Marguerite, this is not the place to talk. This way, please. He glanced at Xing Zijian behind him. You come with me. Seeing those people leave, Lord Han looked at his son who was still sitting on the ground. An inexplicable anger rose in his heart. He kicked him and scolded, tell me what happened just now? Father, help. Before the young man finished his words, Lord Han's face turned pale. What? Your Majesty. He shuddered, then fell limply to the ground, his face full of despair. The other two assistant counselors and manager of the Ministry of Revenue were also scared out of their wits. They fiercely grabbed their sons' collars and angrily said, speak. Did you say anything you shouldn't have? Speak. After stepping into the room, Xianxia turned back and bowed. Zumo, if your aunt said anything she shouldn't have said, I apologize to you here. Zheng Zumo hurriedly dodged and didn't accept the bow. I don't care what she said. I just want to bring back my parents' memorial tablets today. Xianxia raised his head and revealed a troubled expression. Back then, Big Brother was framed by a scoundrel. In order to protect the Zheng family, your grandmother expelled him from the family. However, he is still a member of the Zheng family. Don't worry, I will clear Big Brother's name and restore his identity. Zheng Zumo closed her eyes and took a deep breath, saying slowly, no need. 13 years ago they were no longer members of the Zheng family. 13 years later they still aren't. I will worship their memorial tablets well and won't take up space in the Zheng family's ancestral shrine. Zumo. Li Yi shook his head and interrupted him. He looked at him and said slowly, Lord Xing, we didn't come here today to listen to you. Xianxia looked at him and said, Lord Li, this is the Zheng family's business. I hope you won't interfere. Sorry, I think Lord Xing is mistaken about one thing. Li Yi held her hand and looked at Xianxia. This is not the Zheng family's business. It's the Li family's business. Chapter 836. You the Li family, Xianxia murmured and looked at the two with a new gaze. You have already... Li Yi met his eyes and nodded. Xianxia was stunned for a long time before nodding. Okay, that's fine. He looked at Li Yi and said again, my brother and sister-in-law have passed away. It is the best choice for their spirit tablets to be placed in the ancestral shrine. I, Xianxia, swear to the heavens that I will clear my brother's grievances in my lifetime and let their spirit tablets be placed in front of the Zheng family's ancestral shrine with dignity. Zheng Zumo looked up at him with a hint of emotion in her eyes. Li Yi shook his head and said, Lord Zheng is Lord Zheng and the Zheng family is the Zheng family. I can represent the Zheng family. If you could represent the Zheng family we wouldn't be here today. Li Yi waved his hand and asked, so are you going to bring it over or should we go get it? Xianxia shook his head and said, outsiders are not allowed to enter the ancestral shrine of the Zheng family. Let me go get it. Then he glanced at Zheng Zijian and said, Zijian, come with me. Li Yi took Zheng Zimo's hand and sat down. He asked, did he say the same thing to you last time? Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, last time he wasn't in the manor because, she didn't continue, but it wasn't hard to imagine what had happened last time, judging from the woman's attitude toward her just now. A trace of hostility rose in Li Yi's heart. He really should have found a few more reasons and slapped her a few more times. Suddenly he caught a glimpse of a head peeking at the door. He frowned and said coldly, who is sneaking around there? Misunderstanding, Lord, you misunderstood. It's me. Lord Han hurriedly walked in from outside and bowed. It's all my fault for not teaching my son well. My son is naughty and mischievous and offended Lord Li. I hope you can forgive him and forgive him this time. Li Yi waved his hand and said, the one who misunderstood is Master Han. Speaking of which, it was I who disturbed your son and caused him to be scalded by the hot water. I don't know how his injuries are, I hope Master Han won't blame me. How could it be? How could it be? Official Han repeatedly waved his hand and breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If that's the case, this lowly official will take his leave. Go. Li Yi waved his hand again. Since your son is injured, there is no harm in recuperating for 2 days. As for him talking about His Majesty behind His Majesty's back, we'll talk about it in 2 days. Hearing this, Sir Han's legs went soft and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. He anxiously said, Sir, it's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding. Even if my son was given the guts of the heavens, he wouldn't dare to talk about His Majesty. Don't worry, Sir Han. Since it's a misunderstanding, I believe the Intelligence Bureau will definitely clear your son's name. Intelligence Bureau? Sir Han's expression changed wildly. After muttering a few words, he slowly raised his head and said with some resentment, Sir Li, do you really want to exterminate my Han family? Do you think that without any evidence, just based on your one-sided words, His Majesty will believe it and go to great lengths to deal with my Han family? Whether His Majesty will believe it or not, don't you know in your heart, Sir Han? Thump. Sir Han's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground, crying out, Sir Li, spare me. Sir Han, you're leaving? Xianxia walked to the door of the room with the 2 wooden boxes in his arms and happened to see Sir Han walking out. Sir Han's face was pale. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead with his sleeve and said, there are still some matters in the yamen. I will take my leave first. Sorry for disturbing you today. After saying goodbye to Sir Han, Xianxia walked into the room and handed the wooden box to Zuimo. When you've thought it through, you can come back to find me at any time. Zuimo opened the wooden box and looked inside, then closed it again. She stood up with the wooden box and bowed slightly. Thank you. She turned to look at Li Yi and whispered, let's go back. Li Yi patted her hand. Sit here for a while. I have something to say to Sir Zui. He looked at Xianxia. Sir Zui, can we talk in private? Xianxia nodded and the two went to a side hall. Li Yi casually cupped his hands. I haven't congratulated Sir Zui on your promotion to the capital governor. Xianxia cupped his hands in return. It's all thanks to Sir Li. If he still didn't know what Li Yi meant that day in the palace, then he would have lived all these years in vain. Since you know it's all thanks to me. Li Yi nodded. Then surely Sir Zui won't mind doing me a small favor? Although Xianxia had already guessed that this matter was related to him, he did not expect that he would not shirk away at all. After a moment of shock, Xianxia looked at him cautiously and asked, I wonder what Lord Li wants me to help with? Li Yi looked at him and asked, the capital governor has his own mansion, right? Although he didn't know what he meant, Xianxia nodded. The court has indeed built a mansion for the capital governor. It's in the yamen of the capital. After Sir Zui takes office, will you move to the capital governor's mansion? Xianxia looked at him suspiciously. What does Marquis Li mean? Just say it. Then I'll say it. Li Yi looked around, then turned his head and said, I want the Zing mansion. Li Yi looked at him with a burning gaze. I want you to move out. I want the Zing mansion. Zhe, name your price. What? Xianxia was stunned, then shook his head. That's impossible. This is the Zheng family's ancestral mansion. How could we sell it to you? Besides, the capital governor's mansion is only a temporary residence. If there's a change of position, where do you want me to live? Zhou can buy another mansion. In any case, the Zheng mansion's location isn't very good. Change the place, change the feng shui, and change the mood. Who knows, maybe your luck will turn around and your career will be smoother. Li Yi looked at him and said, there are many good places in the capital. Why does Zhou need to guard this place? No, that's absolutely not possible. Xianxia shook his head and said resolutely, the ancestral mansion can't be abandoned easily. I spent a lot of effort to regain it. Please forgive me for not being able to help you. Li Yi sighed and said, Zhou, this is the first time I'm asking for your help. I'm powerless in this matter. Zhou, you know me. Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, I'm the kind of person who will do anything to achieve my goals. Xianxia looked at him and asked, do you want to rob me if I don't agree? Zhou, don't joke around. Wouldn't that make you a robber? Li Yi shook his head and said, I'm a decent person. I won't do that kind of thing. How about I find a new place for you? I guarantee that it's better and safer than this place. Moreover, the Zheng family definitely won't blame you. Xianxia had a bad premonition and asked, where? The Ministry of Justice's prison. What does Zhou think? If Zhou thinks the Ministry of Justice's prison isn't good, that's fine. There are also the Supreme Court's prison and the Secret Intelligence Bureau's prison to choose from. However, I don't recommend going to the last one. It's easy to get in there but difficult to get out. It should be much cheaper to buy this place from the Imperial Court. Xianxia's expression changed. What do you mean? When I was in the garden just now, I accidentally heard your son discussing state affairs with someone. I have to say Zhou's family is quite good. Young Master Zheng is very concerned about the state and the people as well as His Majesty's health. He's especially worried about who will succeed His Majesty when he passes away in a year or two. That was clearly what that kid from the Han family said. I'm not sure about that. Li Yi shook his head and said, there's a screen outside, so how would I know who said it? But it doesn't matter. When the time comes we'll find out. The Secret Intelligence Bureau is the best at these things. Xianxia looked at him and asked word by word, what use does the Zheng family mansion have to you? Why are you so insistent? It's useless to me. Li Yi shook his head. But she likes it. Xianxia was stunned when he heard this, and his face quickly showed a look of realization. It's drunk ink. He shook his head and said, forget about the Ministry of Justice's prison. Find a better place. Li Yi shook his head and said, she doesn't know about this. Don't tell her yet, Zhou. Xianxia looked at him deeply and said, you have to let the Zheng family have a good new year, right? Of course. Li Yi nodded, thought for a moment and asked, can we get a 20% discount after the new year? Chapter 837. What did you just say? Zheng Zimo turned around and asked Li Yi curiously when they walked out of the Zheng mansion and strolled back to Willow Lane. Nothing. Li Yi shook his head and said, holding 2 wooden boxes, I asked Master Zheng what kind of dowry he planned to prepare for you. I haven't agreed yet. I don't care. Why are you so shameless? Why don't you like it? I like it. After entering the room and placing her parents' memorial tablets, Li Yi and she burned incense and sat on the bedside. She looked at the lit incense and murmured, at that time the government said that my father embezzled the grain and sent people to arrest him. The Zheng family, they threw our things out of the house, saying that my father had done such a thing, so he was not a member of the Zheng family and should not be a burden to the Zheng family. She gradually tightened her grip on Li Yi's hand and her voice became lower and lower. My mother committed suicide, my father was arrested by the government, and I was also taken away by them to the musical house. The musical house. It sounds nice, but no one knows what kind of place it is. Several sisters I met in it died soon after. I remember one time I only ate a moldy steamed bun for 3 days. At that time I was so afraid that one day I would be like them. It's all in the past, all in the past. Li Yi put his arm around her shoulder and gently stroked her hair, with a trace of tenderness in his eyes. It was no wonder that she was always so secretive about her previous experiences. The things that she had suffered during that period of time, if it was anyone else, they would not be willing to easily mention it. Her eyes were slightly absent-minded and she murmured, Later my mother bought me from the musical house and brought me to the Qing mansion. At that time I swore that I would never come back to this place in my life. Li lowered his head and asked softly, "Then why did you come back?" "Because Sister Ruoqing is here." She turned her head to look at Li and said, "Because you are also here." Li pinched her nose and said, "So you had been thinking about me since then?" "Thank you." She leaned comfortably in Li's arms, closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. Li asked in surprise, "What are you thanking me for?" "Yes, thank you. There's not much sincerity in just saying thank you." Before Li could finish his words, two soft lips were imprinted on him. Today's weather was good. Even people's moods couldn't help but become better. They couldn't help but think of some happy things. Walking out of Willow Lane, he saw Fong beside the carriage. Li was surprised and asked, "Why are you here?" "When I passed by just now, I saw the carriage and guessed that the son-in-law must be here." Fong straightened up and asked, "Are we going home now?" "I'm not going back yet." Li shook his head and said, "Send someone to the Zheng residence to hand over an invitation and invite Zhou Xian out." Just now Zhuamo was also at the Zheng residence, so it wasn't appropriate to ask too much. But since everything had been said today, he naturally couldn't pretend that he didn't know some things. "Okay, I'll send someone right away." Fong jumped off the carriage and turned back to say, "Son-in-law, let me remind you. When you go back today, don't smile like you did just now." "Like what?" "Like when you walked out of Willow Lane." Li raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why?" "Because." Fong opened his mouth and shook his head. "Anyway, as long as the son-in-law remembers what I said." "Strange." Li glanced at him and said to the sloppy old man, "Go to the tea house closest to the Zheng residence." In the tea house, Zhou Xian seemed to be in better spirits than before, and the smell of alcohol had mostly dissipated. Before sitting down, he hurriedly asked, "Is there anything else important?" Li poured a cup of tea and asked, "I want to know about Zhuamo's father. What kind of case was he involved in back then?" Zhou Xian paused, and the hand that reached for the teacup retracted. He said in a low voice, "They framed him for embezzling the grain and delayed the battle, which was an important reason for the defeat of a certain war with the Qi kingdom." Li frowned and asked, "With your ability, you haven't found anything after so many years?" Zhou Xian shook his head. "There are many people who know that Big Brother was framed, but none of them really stood out and were willing to vindicate him. Even if they found out, the only person who could be found in this case was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue at that time. If we continue to investigate, it will do more harm than good. Besides, it has been so long, there is no way to investigate." Li thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "What about the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue at that time?" "Later, because of corruption, he was exiled with his whole family. Since it was an exile, there are traces to follow." Zhou Xian shook his head and said, "We can't follow them." At this point there was no need to continue. Li glanced at Zhou Xian, shook his head slightly and said, "We still have to investigate. There is no truth that can't be found out. Otherwise you wouldn't have said those words today." Zhou Xian was silent. After a moment he raised his head and looked at Li, saying, "I'll leave this matter to you. It's not a request. Even if you don't, I must do it." Li shook his head and said, "Regarding this matter, you definitely have more information than I do. Another day, invite Assistant Minister Liu of the Ministry of Justice to a meal. We still have to rely on him for this matter. Also, regarding the Zheng family's mansion." Zhou Xian waved his hand and said, "That mansion, if you want it, you can have it. The Zheng family is no longer the original Zheng family. There is no point in keeping that mansion. In comparison, Zhuamo needs it more." Li looked at him and said, "There are still a few months before Zhuamo's birthday. I want to give the Zheng family mansion as a gift to her. Lord Zheng shouldn't forget what the Zheng family was like 13 years ago, right?" "Of course I won't forget. Every flower and grass, every wood and stone of the Zheng family, they are all." He glanced at Li, nodded slightly and said, "You are thoughtful. When the time comes, I will have to trouble Lord Zheng." Li stood up and said, "Her Royal Highness values Lord Zheng very much. Lord Zheng should stay close to the virtuous officials and stay away from the evil ones. In the future you will definitely have a bright future." Zhou Xian naturally knew what this sentence meant. He said calmly, "County Marguerite, please tell Her Royal Highness that I will not let her down." In addition, thank you for the transfer of the capital governor. This is Her Royal Highness's wish. It has nothing to do with me. Li Yi waved his hand and walked to the door. Watching him walk out and disappear, Xianxia murmured in a voice that only he could hear, "Isn't your wish the princess's?" Li Yi's figure appeared at the door again. He glanced at Xianxia and said lightly, "Lord Zheng, you will be the capital governor soon. Be careful with your words." There was no need to worry about the Zheng family for the time being. Not to mention others, Xianxia still had some conscience. Although Zhuo didn't show it on the surface, he was her second uncle after all. She still had some hope in her heart. Speaking of which, after returning from the Zheng family, she seemed to be more open. This was a good sign. Thinking of the kiss during the day, Li Yi couldn't help but smile. "What are you thinking about? Why are you so happy?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked with her arms crossed in front of her chest. When Li Yi was thinking about why he was so happy, Mississippi Lu suddenly took a step forward and reached out to his chest. "What are you doing?" Li Yi asked warily. She had retracted her hand and pinched a strand of long black hair between her fingers. She looked at him and asked, "Whose hair is it?" Such as, Li Yi suddenly remembered that Rui went out early in the morning at the invitation of the princess, and Xiao Huan naturally went with her. Proud Lolita's hair didn't have such long hair, not to mention Yong Ning's. He couldn't say it was Fang's, could he? And this matter was not suitable for Mississippi Lu to know for the time being. "I don't know." Li Yi looked surprised and looked at her and said, "Why don't you guess?" Chapter 838. Seeing that Mississippi Lu had no intention of guessing, Li Yi asked tentatively, "Do you think Li Xian's hair is this long?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "I already know everything." "What, you already know everything?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise. Could it be that Rui had already told her about it? He had thought that Rui would strongly object to it, but he did not expect her to be so understanding. Li Yi nodded and said, "Since you already know, then it's fine. She doesn't want to leave Willow Lane for now, but she will enter the residence sooner or later. When that time comes, Princess Xianing is no longer a child. There is a difference between men and women. Even if she is close to you, there should be a boundary." Mississippi Lu paused and looked at Li Yi. She raised an eyebrow and asked, "Willow Lane, enter the residence. Who are you talking about? What do you mean?" "Xianing?" Li Yi stood rooted to the ground for a long time before he stood up and looked at her. "Are you hungry? Do you want me to cook a bowl of noodles for you?" Mississippi Lu nodded and said, "A little." "Go ahead." "What Willow Lane? What entering the residence? We'll talk about it while we eat." "Oh yes, remember to add more vegetables and vinegar." The Spring Festival was a very joyous occasion. No matter how much hardship and exhaustion one had endured in the past year, in the short month between the end of the year and the Lantern Festival, one would always unload the heavy burden on one's shoulders and spend a few comfortable days with the family. However, these days Li Yi did not have a good time. The little fellow was almost 2 months old. He could barely make sounds of ah ah oh oh. He was no longer as sleepy as before. While he became more active, he naturally became more restless. Rui did not ask a wet nurse or a maid to take care of the child. He got up in the middle of the night and cried a lot. These days the two of them rarely had a good sleep. Mississippi Lu had not spoken to him for a few days because of that important matter. She kept a straight face and was cold. They hadn't even entered the residence yet. When that time came, just thinking about it gave her a headache. At the end of the year, the court meeting was approaching. All the officials were coming to the capital. The princess had a lot of things to do and hadn't seen her for a few days. He didn't have much time either. He didn't have to worry about the brothel and the shop. But at the end of the year there were many things that he needed to see for himself. Seeing that it was New Year's Eve, he must still spend this year at home. Next year he might be able to bring Zhuo and Ruoqing over. The whole family could make dumplings and stay up for the new year together. Of course, for now it was just a thought. After coaxing the little fellow to sleep again, Li Yi walked out of the room tiredly. Looking at the moon in the sky that was missing a corner, he murmured, "It's still missing something." After entering the 12th month, especially when it was getting closer and closer to the new year, the entire capital gradually became more lively and prosperous. The big families had to prepare for the celebration, and the ordinary people also had to buy the New Year's goods. All the big shops were overcrowded. The small merchants and peddlers also seized the only opportunity of the year, thinking of making a lot of money at the end of the year. The streets were crowded and pedestrians could only walk slowly. At the gate of the city, a huge fleet of carriages slowly entered after being inspected by the guards at the gate. At the forefront, a tall man looked back at the towering city wall, and then looked at the endless tide of people in front of him and the row upon row of shops. He turned his head and said, "Miss, the capital of the Jing Kingdom is much more prosperous than the last time we came here." The woman nodded and said, "Wait until we put the goods in the official warehouse first, then we can take our time to see." When the fleet of carriages turned and went to another road with fewer people, many people sighed aloud. Other people pay 30% tax to 1%, but when it comes to us, it becomes 10% tax to 1%. This is a total difference of 2 times. When we go back this time, I'm afraid it will be very good if we can keep our capital. All right, there's nothing to complain about. 30% tax to 1% is for the merchants of the Jing Kingdom. We better not think too much. Wasn't it 30% tax to 1% before, but this year? Alas, who asked us to lose the war? After this trip, we'd better stay in the Qi Kingdom obediently. Don't take this risk easily. A low-ranking official led the fleet of carriages to the front of a government office and shouted, "There's work. Come out and receive the goods." Immediately, a man ran out from the duty room. The low-ranking official glanced at him and said, "These are the peddling merchants of the Qi Kingdom. I'll leave them to you." Then he turned and left. "Aren't you just a doorkeeper? What's there to be so arrogant about?" The bailiff glanced at him, then turned his eyes to the crowd and waved his hand. "All of you stand over there." Although this was only a bailiff from a small government office, none of them dared to disobey him. They stood obediently to the side. These peddling merchants were different from the merchants who owned shops here. After entering the city, they had to first register their goods in the official warehouse and pay the taxes before they could enter the market to be sold. As for the merchants from the Qi Kingdom, they were different from the local peddling merchants of the Jing Kingdom. In comparison, they were often ostracized and treated unfairly. 10% tax to 1%, so be it. The perfumes and ready-made clothes from the capital city of the Jing Kingdom are very famous. They're very popular even in the Qi Kingdom. If we trade these things back, it'll be profitable. I've heard that the women's personal belongings they sell are also very profitable. The biggest profit should be Lioli. What a pity for those damned foreign merchants. Alas, let's not talk about it. The winter weather was still a little cold. The crowd stood outside for about 2 hours before someone came out again. "Thank you, Your Excellency." A man went up to greet the bailiff with a respectful expression. After receiving the tax receipt, he glanced at it and his expression froze in an instant. He raised his head in disbelief and asked, "Your Excellency, is there a mistake in the calculation?" The bailiff waved his hand and said impatiently, "For people like you who seek personal gain, 5% tax to 1% is already too little. Pay the tax quickly and don't leave your things there and take up space. Your Excellency, this is really too much. You can't. If you think it's too much, then you can take it back." The bailiff glanced at him and said indifferently before turning to leave, "They were just a few merchants from the Qi Kingdom. Didn't they see where they were? Was this a place where they could bargain?" Outside the yamen, the man leaned against the wall and cursed, "These black-hearted dogs, they're clearly trying to bully us. Lower your voice." The woman glanced at him and said, "This is the Jing Kingdom. We live under the eaves. It's better to suffer a little than to lose everything." The man nodded gloomily and asked, "Then miss, what should we do now?" The woman thought for a moment and said, "Let's find a place to settle down first." The man's face revealed an excited expression. He licked his lips and said, "Why don't we go find the Li brothers? Didn't Li brothers say that we should go find him when we come to the capital? I haven't seen him for more than half a year and I really miss him." The woman looked at him and shook her head. "Let's find an inn first. We can ask around later." She looked at the crowded streets and murmured, "Since we're here, we should meet him." Chapter 839. So this is the home of the Li brothers. How extravagant. Lin Yong couldn't help saying as he stood in front of a mansion and looked up. The woman beside him glanced at him and said, "Don't call him that when you go in. This is not the Qi Kingdom and he's no longer the accountant of the Lin family. You have to know your place." "Don't worry, Mississippi. I know that." Lin Yong nodded and walked toward the door. When Fong and Li Yi walked out, he couldn't help saying, Young master, I think you should apologize to second miss about this. You shouldn't hide such an important thing from her. It's normal for her to be angry with you. Does that mean that sister-in-law Fong already knows about Xiaohong? That's different. Second miss is not. Fong opened his mouth and shook his head. Forget it. It's the same. But I still think it's your fault. Li nodded. I know. It's my fault. I'll talk to her. Li brothers. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a voice. Generally speaking, people would only address him as young master, Lord Li, County Marquis Li, and those who were more familiar with him like Li Xian, never addressed him as Li brothers. It had been a long time since he heard them address each other as such. Li raised his head. When he saw the man standing at the door with a surprised face, he was stunned at first, and then his face showed surprise and delight. Brother Lin, why are you here? Lin Yong smiled and said, I came here with Miss to do business, so I came to see you. It's the spring festival, but you're still so tired. He generously gave him a bear hug and asked, Where's Miss Lin? Lin Yong turned around and pointed to the back. Over there. I was just about to send someone in to inform her and you came out. Gazing outside, Li quickly walked over. That woman smiled at him and extended her hand. Long time no see. Long time no see. Li smiled and nodded. Then he looked at her outstretched hand and asked, This is... Lin Wanru looked at him in surprise and asked, A handshake? Isn't that the etiquette here? Oh, that's right, that's right. Li came to a sudden realization. He reached out his hand and touched her palm gently. He asked tentatively, You guys didn't greet everyone like this all the way here, right? Lin Wanru shook her head. You're the first. That's good, that's good. Li nodded and said, This, handshake is actually a lost etiquette in my hometown. No one uses it anymore. So if you meet someone in the future, just salute normally. I got it. Lin Wanru looked at him meaningfully and nodded. Then she looked up at him and asked, The handshake in your hometown? Do you need to shake for so long? This depends on how long we've been apart. We haven't seen each other for more than half a year, so we should shake for a longer time. Li naturally let go of her hand and said, Don't stand outside anymore. Go in quickly. Then he turned around and waved at Fong. By the way, Fong, go and inform eldest miss that a distinguished guest has arrived. When they walked into the mansion, Li turned his head and asked her, It's almost the spring festival. Why did you come at this time? We're doing business. There's no difference whether we celebrate the spring festival or not. Lin Wanru smiled and said, The closer it is to the spring festival, the busier I am. In the past I rarely stayed at home. It's just that I've traveled a little further this year. This was far more than just a little further. If it were a caravan, it would take at least a few months to travel from the Qi Kingdom. This round trip would take at least half a year on the road. Rui came out to welcome them. She first bowed to Lin Wanru, then looked at Li and asked, Husband, this young lady is... Li introduced, This is Lin Wanru, Miss Lin, whom I've often mentioned to you. When Rui and I were in the Qi Kingdom, it was thanks to Miss Lin's care. So this is Miss Lin. Rui held her hand and said, When husband and Rui were stranded in the Qi Kingdom, it was thanks to Miss Lin's care. I've always wanted to thank you. This time I finally have the chance. Come in. A smile appeared on Lin Wanru's face. Madam Li, you're too polite. Watching them walk in hand, Li looked left and right and asked, Where's Rui? During her time in the Qi Kingdom, Mississippi Lu only had Lin Wanru as a friend. He believed that Mississippi Lu would be very happy to see her again. A servant girl said, Second miss should be in her room. Go and call her. Li said, then waved his hand and said, Forget it, I'll go there myself. He couldn't keep the Cold War with Mississippi Lu. There had to be someone who spoke first. Generally speaking, this person could only be him. From afar he saw Xiao Huan sitting in the corridor in front of Mississippi Lu's room. Li walked over and asked, Is second miss inside? The little servant girl nodded. Li habitually rubbed her head and walked inside. Hey son-in-law. Xiao Huan immediately called out to him. What's wrong? Li turned around and asked in confusion, Is there anything else? The little servant girl rolled her eyes and bit her lips. Then she said with a smile, Nothing, son-in-law, please go in. With the lesson from last time, Li first knocked on the door. When he heard the voice, Come in, he pushed the door open and walked in. After closing the door and turning around, he was immediately stunned. This time it wasn't because he saw something he shouldn't have seen. To be exact, he didn't see anything this time. The room was filled with water vapor blocking his vision. In addition, there was a faint fragrance. A surprised expression appeared on Li Yi's face. This cloud of mist, could it be that she was secretly cultivating in the room? Xiaohuan, help me add some more hot water. When Mississippi Lu's voice came out of the mist, Li Yi finally realized what had happened. He cleared his throat and asked, there's an important guest at home. Do you want to go out and meet him? The voice in the mist paused for a moment before it came again, go out. Li Yi decisively turned around without any hesitation. When he closed the door, he carefully asked, do you still want more hot water? When he walked into the courtyard, he saw the little servant girl still standing there. Before he could speak, Xiaohuan held her stomach and said with a bitter face, son-in-law, my stomach hurts. I'll go back to my room first. Seeing her quickly slip away, Li Yi said in surprise, stomach hurts? It shouldn't be these few days. He looked back at the door of Mississippi Lu's room and decided to stand there and wait for her. Not long after, Mississippi Lu, who had changed into a new set of clothes, walked out from inside. She didn't mention what had happened just now. Instead, she looked at Li Yi and said calmly, she's here? Li Yi was stunned when he heard this. No way she could even guess this. Seeing Li Yi's expression, her eyes flickered and she asked again, the painting hidden in your study is her, right? Have you known each other for a long time? Ah. When I kidnapped you up the mountain, I was the one who separated you. If it wasn't for me, you and she would have. Sister doesn't care, so I have no reason to object. Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, but you shouldn't hide this from me. Next time if you hide it from me like this, I'll ignore you forever. What? She took a deep breath and said, let's go and meet the second wife of the Li residence. What second wife? Li Yi looked at her in surprise and said, Miss Lin has come to the capital. I came to call you and bring you to see her. What are you talking about? What? What did you mean by what you said just now? Mississippi Lu was stunned on the spot. After a moment, she waved her hand and said lightly, nothing, let's go. When walking with her, Li Yi seemed to understand something. He suddenly stopped and looked at her. He promised, don't worry, next time. I won't hide it from you, I swear. Chapter 840. Mississippi Lu turned to look at him. How many more times do you want to do it? Only a few times. Li Yi secretly counted his fingers and then urged, let's go quickly. Don't let Miss Lin and the others wait too long. The friendship between women always came very quickly. By the time he and Mississippi Lu walked over, Lin Wanru and Rui were already calling each other Sister Lu and Sister Lin. After Mississippi Lu went over, there was even less for him to do. He walked over and asked Lin Yong, when did you arrive in the capital? Where are you staying now? Lin Yong replied, we just arrived yesterday and found a random inn to stay in. Li Yi shook his head and said, since you're already in the capital, it's not appropriate to stay in an inn. Which inn are you staying in? I'll ask someone to help you pack your things and move in today. Lin Yong rubbed his hands. That's so embarrassing. Rui and Lin Wanru walked out of the room and said, husband, there are many empty guest rooms at home. During this time, let Sister Lin move in so that she can take care of you. That's what I mean too. Li Yi nodded and walked over. He looked at Lin Wanru and said, Miss Lin, which inn are you staying in? I'll ask someone to help you pack your things. There's no need to go through so much trouble. It's no trouble at all. Didn't we trouble you a lot back then? Okay then. Lin Wanru said a few words and finally nodded in agreement. It would take some time to pack, so they didn't stay at home for long. They asked Fong to call 2 guards from the mansion to help. Li Yi originally planned to go out, so he naturally needed to accompany them when he met them. At the entrance of an inn in the capital, several figures were anxiously pacing. Tell me, where did Miss Lin go at such an important time? The goods are still being held by them. If anything happens to the goods, our trip will be in vain. Aya, what should we do now? The officials of the Jing Kingdom are really going too far in their bullying. The few merchants of the Qi Kingdom were anxious. In the past, the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom were enemies as well. However, the Qi Kingdom was very powerful. When they were doing business in the Jing Kingdom, they would not encounter too many obstacles. On the contrary, the Jing Kingdom would deliberately make things convenient for them. However, it was different now. The situation in the Jing Kingdom had reversed in the past 2 years. Their situation had suddenly become very difficult. "Hey, Miss Lin is back," someone shouted. The crowd crowded around her and asked anxiously, "Miss Lin, what should we do about this matter? Please give us a definite answer." Although Miss Lin was young, her family's business was very big. Her background was also very strong. She was the leader of the caravan on this trip. Li Yi asked in surprise, "What happened?" Lin Yong said gloomily, "It's all because of those black-hearted people in the treasury. The taxes are 5% and 1%. If we pay the money, our trip will be in vain." The treasury? After listening to Lin Yong's description of the matter, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "The imperial court would not normally impose such a heavy tax. It must be the people at the bottom who are deliberately making things difficult for you. After all, you are from the Qi Kingdom. Even if they really make things difficult for you, you have no way to reason with them." The merchants from the Qi Kingdom were speechless. Thinking back to 2 years ago, they had been so proud to be citizens of Qi. Less than 2 years later, they had been reduced to being bullied by a petty official. But this 1% tax is indeed a bit too much. Li Yi knew what was going on. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go. Let's settle this matter first." Lin Wanru grabbed his sleeve and asked, "Will it cause you trouble?" "What's the trouble?" Li Yi smiled and said, "Anyway, there's nothing urgent. Let's go to the Ministry of Revenue and have a cup of tea. Do you want to wait here or come with me?" Lin Wanru thought for a moment and nodded. "I'll go with you." "I'll go too," Lin Yong immediately said. "Who is that?" Watching the three leave, one of the merchants from the Qi Kingdom turned his head and asked the person behind him in confusion. "I don't know." The accompanying Lin family shopkeeper was also at a loss. He had never heard that Miss knew any important people in the Jing Kingdom. But that person just now, why did he look so familiar? The merchants from the Qi Kingdom looked in a certain direction at the same time. Their hearts were filled with anxiety and anticipation. Now they could only place all their hopes on this. On the street, Lin Yong asked in surprise, "Li brothers, why are we not going to the official warehouse but to the Ministry of Revenue Yamen? When it comes to collecting taxes, the Ministry of Revenue is still in charge. It will be more effective to find an official from the Ministry of Revenue." Li Yi explained, "More importantly, the Ministry of Revenue Yamen is closer." It was also Li Yi's first time coming to the Ministry of Revenue Yamen. After stating his identity, someone immediately went in to pass on the message. The three of them had just entered the courtyard when someone quickly ran out from one of the duty rooms. When that person ran down the steps, he almost tripped. Without even straightening his official robes, he said in a panic, "Lord Li." Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and asked, "Dr. Han, don't panic. Are Minister Qin and Assistant Minister Zheng here?" Dr. Han said in fear and trepidation, "The two lords are not in the Yamen at the moment. May I ask what Lord Li needs? Can this lowly official be of service?" This was a small matter, and Li Yi thought that this Minister of Revenue would be able to handle it as well. Thus, Li Yi briefly explained the matter to him. "Don't worry, my lord. This lowly official will immediately send someone. No, this lowly official will personally ask." Seeing that Lord Li was not here to cause trouble, Minister Han immediately relaxed and respectfully spoke. He immediately waved his hand at a lowly official. "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and serve Lord Li some tea." "There's no need." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I still have matters to attend to, so I'll be leaving first. Dr. Han, please take care of this matter as soon as possible." Dr. Han immediately bowed. "This lowly official will see you off, Lord Li." After walking out of the Ministry of Revenue Yamen, Lin Yong asked in surprise, "Li brothers, I feel like that doctor just now was very afraid of you. You must have seen wrongly." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Am I that scary?" Lin Wanru glanced at him and didn't say anything. "That's true." Lin Yong nodded and asked, "Then where are we going now?" Li Yi thought about it and said, "It will take a while to clean up both sides. Have you eaten yet? Do you want to find a place to eat first?" Lin Yong shook his head and said, "We haven't eaten anything since morning." Li Yi turned his head and asked, "Then let's eat first. What do you think, Miss Lin?" Lin Wanru nodded in agreement. Li Yi looked up and pointed to the restaurant in front of them. He said, "This is the place." After walking into the restaurant, a waiter quickly came over and looked at them. He said apologetically, "Dear guests, I'm sorry but we are full now. There are no more seats. Would you like to wait for a while?" Lin Yong looked at the seats that were all filled and said, "Why don't we go somewhere else?" Li Yi looked around and happened to meet the gaze of a table beside him. "Come brother Wu, let me toast you." Wei Junliang had just raised his wine cup and gestured to the young man opposite him when he suddenly sensed something and turned his head to look. Clatter. His hand involuntarily trembled and the wine cup fell to the ground. His face began to pale. "I'm done eating. Go." He quickly stood up and walked out of the door with his head down. "The dishes have just been served. I haven't eaten yet." Several young people showed surprise on their faces. When they looked over, they all stood up and left with Wei Junliang. "Oh, what a coincidence. Isn't there a seat now?" Lin Yong's face suddenly lit up. He patted the waiter's shoulder and said, "Come on, clean up that table." Lin Wanru looked back and then looked at Li Yi in surprise. She asked, "You know each other?" Among the young people at the table just now, there were indeed a few familiar faces, but she couldn't tell their names. Li Yi nodded and said, "I know them but I'm not familiar with them. There are seats available. Let's go." Chapter 841. On the street, a few young people walked dejectedly. One of them furrowed his brows for a long time and finally couldn't help but ask, "Junliang, Lu Yi, what's wrong with you? You haven't even had 2 cups of wine and the dishes have just arrived. Why are you leaving?" A young man sighed and said, "Ah, Chu Ping, don't ask too much. You don't know, in short, just leave." The young man called Chu Ping was slightly anxious and asked, "Just what happened? Tell me." The young man looked at the person beside him and said, "Junliang, you tell me." Chu Ping's gaze also turned to him. Wei Junliang shook his head and said, "Chu Ping, you've just returned to the capital and there are some things you don't know. However, let me remind you, if you meet that person in the future, hide as far away as possible. If something really happens, your family won't be able to protect you." "Which person?" Chu Ping asked in confusion, then said, "The person we met in the restaurant just now? Who is he?" Li. Wei Junliang patted his shoulder and said, "Remember this name, His Highness the King of Shu, Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang. In the younger generation of the capital, countless people have suffered at his hands, and it's not just the younger generation. In short, remember my words, do not provoke him." After hearing about that person's deeds from Wei Junliang, Chu Ping's heart was greatly shaken. However, he still curled his lips and pretended to be disdainful. "So what? This is the capital, under the feet of the emperor. We didn't provoke him. He acts so arrogantly. Even if His Majesty cares for him and can temporarily protect him, can he stop the mouths of the people of the world? Chu Ping, the way you speak is exactly the same as Grand Tutor Chu. No wonder you were personally taught by him." Wei Junliang said with a smile, "I still remember how he lectured us back then. Of course." Chu Ping's face revealed an expression of pride. "I, Chu Ping, am filled with righteousness. I am worthy of neither the heavens nor the earth. Why would I fear a sycophant? Chu Ping, I know you have awe-inspiring righteousness." Wei Junliang laughed out loud and said, "No matter what, I finally had the chance to have a meal with you today, but I ruined my mood. How about this? I will set up a new banquet at the wonderful Sound Pavilion tonight. You must give me face." Immediately, someone laughed and said, "You chose the wonderful Sound Pavilion. I'm afraid it's not as simple as just eating, right?" Chu Ping said in surprise, "Wonderful Sound Pavilion. This place sounds like a music hall. Could it be that there are some mysteries here?" That person walked to his side and whispered a few words. Chu Ping's expression immediately changed and he hurriedly said, No, if Grandpa finds out that I went to that kind of place, he'll beat me to death. Alas, this wonderful Sound Pavilion is a place of entertainment. Could it be that the Lord Imperial Tutor is overthinking things?" Chu Ping hesitated and asked, "Are you sure no one will know about this?" That person smiled and said, "Apart from heaven and earth, there is only you and me." A smile appeared on Chu Ping's face as he said, "I just want to listen to music and have a meal. I will definitely go. In the restaurant, seeing that Lin Wanru had also put down her chopsticks, Li opened his mouth and said, "Let's go. The matters over there should be more or less settled." The sloppy old man's toothache hadn't healed yet, so he could only eat porridge for now. Fong ran between the two places every day, so he didn't know how many meals he had to eat. "Wait a moment, one last mouthful. Lin Yong hurriedly said as he drank the last mouthful of soup in his cup. Only then did he burp and stand up while rubbing his stomach. Lin Wanru blushed slightly. She secretly glared at him before nodding and standing up. The two chatted as they walked back. Li Yi asked a few things about the Lin family's business. In Feng province, with the backing of the third prince and the Qian family, the Lin family had once again taken a few steps forward in just half a year. Although it hadn't reached the level of a top wealthy family, it was already a long time ago. For example, the Bai family and the Ma family, which used to be on the same level as the Lin family, could now only become the vassals of the Lin family. Since the price of colored glass had plummeted, they could only rely on the Lin family to barely survive. Lin Wanru looked at the row upon row of streets on both sides of the street, thought for a moment and said, "If it's just jewelry, it may be the end soon. This time, the main reason I came here is actually to visit the capital of the Jing Kingdom. The ready-made clothes, perfume, liquor, are all very popular in the Qi Kingdom. Unfortunately, I can only bring them in this way and the price is very high. If I can directly reach an agreement with them and build the workshop in the Qi Kingdom, I can reduce more than 70% of the cost." She paused and said, "However, I heard that these shops all have the shadow of the royal family behind them. I'm afraid it's unlikely." "That's not necessarily true." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Everything is possible." Lin Yong interrupted, "It's not easy to make perfume and liquor, but what's there to cooperate with about clothes? Just make it according to the original." Li Yi glanced at him. If he were to do business in the future for another 1,000 years, he would definitely lose so much that even his underwear would not be left. However, for now what he said was not wrong at all. Regardless of whether it was underwear or ready-made clothes, he wanted to first build up his reputation and reputation. This way, even if there were imitators in the future, they would not be too much of a threat. Lin Wanru also glanced at him but did not say anything. If things were really that simple, ready-made clothes shops in the Qi Kingdom would have sprung up a long time ago. In fact, although there were countless people imitating the Jing Kingdom, the quality of the fabric and the style of the clothes were far from being comparable to the authentic products in the Jing Kingdom. Those shops sprung up like mushrooms after a spring rain, only to close down in a short period of time. Although Li Yi did not say anything, Lin Wanru's words reminded him that if he were to cooperate with the Lin family, his own shop would soon be able to open in the Qi Kingdom. Although the Jing Kingdom was huge, there would always be a time when business would be saturated. The Qi Kingdom. This was a piece of land that had not been cultivated yet, and it was exceptionally fertile. It was just waiting for him and Miss Lin to sow the seeds. Thinking of this, Li Yi tilted his head and asked, "Seriously, does the Lin family really intend to intervene in these businesses?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "This is also one of the important reasons why I came to the capital this time." "Can you handle it? It shouldn't be a problem to hire more people." Fong looked at the two figures walking side by side in front of him and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Li brothers." Lin Yong thought of something and was about to step forward when someone pressed down on his shoulder. "Where are you going?" Fong asked in a low voice. "I have a question for the Li brothers." "What question?" Fong put his arm around his shoulder and said, "This brother is called Lin Yong, right? The son-in-law is very busy now, don't disturb him. If you have any questions you can ask me. I'm really sorry, this is all our negligence and we've caused you trouble." At the entrance of the restaurant, Dr. Han said apologetically to the people opposite him, "Don't worry, we will definitely deal with this matter seriously. We will not tolerate those who are biased." We don't dare. A merchant from the Qi Kingdom looked at this official from the Jing Kingdom, and his face turned pale with fright. At a glance he could tell that this official's status was much higher than the officials they had met along the way. He was actually speaking to them in such a polite manner. It really made them feel weak. From afar he saw Lin Wanru walking over in front of him. Only then did he take a few quick steps forward and hurriedly say, "Miss Lin, this." Before Lin Wanru could react to what had happened, Li Yi had already walked over and said, "This kind of matter can be handled by anyone. Why did Dr. Han come personally?" Dr. Han hurriedly said, "Lord Li, to tell you the truth, this lowly official is in charge of the official treasury. These days the Ministry of Revenue has been busy and had no time to attend to other matters. I didn't think that these bastards would be so bold. Don't worry, Lord Li, this lowly official will definitely investigate this matter to the end." He then raised his head and said tentatively, "This lowly official has already sent out all the goods, not a single one missing. I wonder if Lord Li, didn't you collect taxes? Afraid that he would anger this Lord Li, Dr. Han immediately shook his head. No, not a single coin was collected. How can this be? Li Yi shook his head. This tax was for the country, and for the country it was for Emmingzhu, and for Emmingzhu it was... In short, as a law-abiding citizen he couldn't be given special treatment. Everything was done according to the law. Seeing Lord Li shake his head, Dr. Han's body trembled. Li Yi patted his shoulder and said, the taxes that should be collected still have to be collected. Otherwise, how can the country's laws be respected? Dr. Han, you must be fair, you can't be biased. Hearing this, Dr. Han's face turned bitter and his voice sounded like he was about to cry. He nodded repeatedly. Lord Li is right. This lowly official will collect them immediately. Chapter 842. In the Jing Kingdom, the merchants from the Qi Kingdom and those from the Jing Kingdom were naturally treated differently. It was normal for the merchants to be taxed twice as much. In fact, in the Qi Kingdom, the laws were even stricter when it came to merchants from other countries. However, even so, it was enough for the merchants of the Qi state to thank this young man from the Jing state endlessly. If it wasn't for him, they would have wasted more than half a year on this trip. Some of them would have even lost their entire family's wealth. At the same time, he secretly rejoiced in his heart. He rejoiced that he was following Miss Lin and not someone else. Thinking of the doctor's attitude just now, who would have thought that the Lin family was not only all-powerful in the kingdom of Qi, but also in the distant capital of the Jing Kingdom. Lin Wanru and Lin Yong went up to tidy up the room and left the rest to the guards from the Li family. As for the shopkeepers and waiters from the Lin family, they stayed in the inn temporarily to deal with the goods brought from the Qi Kingdom. With nothing to do, Li Yi turned to look at them and said, it's still early. Why don't I show you around the capital? Lin Wanru nodded without any hesitation and said, I knew that the capital is prosperous. Even the capital of the Qi Kingdom can't compare. Now that we're fated to meet, of course we have to take a good look. Sorry to trouble you. No need to stand on ceremony with us. Li Yi waved his hand and said, then let's go now. It's time to go back after walking around for more than 2 hours. The capital was the capital not only because it was the outskirts of the emperor, where the imperial city was located, and the center of power in the Jing Kingdom, but also because of its extremely prosperous commerce. For Lin Wanru and Lin Yong, there were too many things here that they couldn't see in the Qi Kingdom. For example, in the shops that sold women's personal items, there would occasionally be the figures of men. In such an environment, these people could still maintain a straight face, and from time to time, they would gossip with their female companions. Lin Yong watched as Li Yi walked in, and the man surnamed Fong followed him without any change in expression. Lin Yong then walked into the shop with relief. But soon after, he was dazzled by all kinds of colorful little objects that he had never seen before. He lowered his head, not daring to look again, and hurriedly retreated. Li Yi turned around and glanced at him. He wasn't surprised by Lin Yong's actions. In fact, even the majority of men in the capital city did not have the courage to step into a lingerie shop. Of course, in the past year, there had also been some people with avant-garde ideas and artistic hearts who wanted to use their discerning eyes to personally pick 1 or 2 pieces of clothing for their female companions. At this time, Lin Wanru was just a simple businesswoman. At the beginning, when Li Yi followed beside her and accompanied her to look at these women's lingerie, her face blushed for a moment, but it soon became natural. When she stopped beside a shelf, Li Yi asked, how is it? Lin Wanru was surprised and asked, what do you mean, how is it? How I feel about this place. She was stunned for a moment, then looked around and said, be it the fabric or the weavers, they are all very high quality. Although there are many styles, each one is extremely beautiful. You can see that the designer of these things have put in a lot of effort. It's not surprising that they are popular and sought after by women all over the world. No wonder, although there are so many people trying to imitate them, few succeed. Unless we reach an agreement with them, it will be very difficult to imitate them. Lin Wanru shook her head and said, let's go. Li Yi nodded and then turned to look at a young girl behind them. He pointed to a few pieces of clothing that Lin Wanru's gaze had lingered on for a long time and ordered, wrap these up for this girl. Lin Wanru was stunned for a moment, then shook her head and said, no need, I'll just look. Li Yi waved his hand and said, you're welcome. Speaking of which, I haven't officially given you anything yet. Since you're in the capital city, I have to do my part as a host. Don't refuse. Lin Wanru looked at him and said in surprise, is it also the custom of your hometown to give a girl these for the first time? This is not the point. Li Yi shook his head and said, in the past when we were in the Qi kingdom, it was always you who gave us things. This time don't be polite with me. Miss, it's done. The young girl smiled and handed over a cloth bag embroidered with a few willow leaves. Only then did Lin Wanru notice that in the shop, many women were carrying such bags in their hands. The material of this handbag was excellent and it also looked good. No wonder the underwear here was so expensive. Just from the handbags they gave it could be seen. Li Yi smiled at the young girl, then turned back and said, let's go out and look at the other things. You haven't paid yet. Although Li Yi had said that this was a gift for her, Lin Wanru still took out her purse and was about to ask the young girl for the price. Li Yi, who was beside her, waved his hand lightly and said, it's our own shop, no need to be polite. The purse in Lin Wanru's hand almost fell to the ground. She looked at him in a daze and murmured, this shop? Is it your family's? Ever since Lin Yong found out that the shop that sold women's underwear belonged to the Li brothers, he always had an illusion when he looked at him. It was as if there was a halo above his head. Women's underwear, bras and other things were flying around the halo. Lin Wanru walked on the street and finally recovered from the shock of what had just happened. She said, there's a tailor shop here. A moment later she saw the young girl in the shop handing her a familiar handbag and the willow leaf on it. She turned to look at Li Yi and murmured, this? Li Yi looked at her and nodded. You're welcome. Lin Wanru finally understood this time. As long as there was a willow leaf logo, there was no need to be polite. After walking halfway down the street she discovered that not only the underwear shops, but also the cloth shops, perfume shops, soap shops, wine shops, confectionery shops, and even the Ru family inn where they had stayed yesterday were also free to use. This even gave her the illusion that she didn't need to be polite when buying things in the entire capital. The Lin family had been merchants for generations and had been illustrious and glorious. She had seen many rich and powerful merchants, but even those people couldn't compare to the scene she saw with her own eyes today. Miss, we've been walking for a long time. Should we find a place to rest? Lin Yong looked around and her eyes suddenly lit up. There's a brothel in front. Why don't we go inside and listen to a show? I heard that the shows in the Jing Kingdom's brothel are very exciting. Lin Wanru's mind was a bit confused at this moment. She wanted to find a place to properly sort out her thoughts. Moreover, Lin Yong's body was already full of things. Finding a place to rest would be good. She turned to look at Li Yi to ask for his opinion. Seeing Li Yi nod, she said, that's fine. I've only heard about the Jing Kingdom's brothel. Today is a good opportunity to see it. After walking into the brothel, her footsteps paused. She seemed to have thought of something. She retreated outside and looked up. There was a beautiful willow leaf logo on top of her head. It was particularly eye-catching. Go in. Whatever show you want to listen to. Li Yi walked over from behind and said, you're welcome. Chapter 843. This is such a big place and it's all ours? Lin Yong was still not used to the feeling of renting out a theater. He looked down at the stage below, then looked left and right and saw that there were no other customers besides them. There were all sorts of fruits and pastries on the table in front of them. He asked with uncertainty. Fong patted his shoulder, took a pear from the table and took a bite. He said, don't look, no one else will come in. Li Yi had no intention of renting out the theater, but the scene that Lin Wanru had casually ordered was not scheduled today, so it could only be performed at the last minute. Li Yi did not tell her either. After all, it was his family's brothel and it was not a big deal to be a little extravagant once in a while. Lin Wanru took a sip of tea and looked down at the stage, but her mind was not there. She had known many things about him a long time ago. He was the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom and a favorite minister of the emperor. Before he had even reached the age of 20, he had risen from a commoner to a noble, and his glory was unparalleled. If not for the experience in the Qi Kingdom half a year ago, given their status and position, perhaps they would never have met, and the things that had happened before would not have happened. Originally, she had thought that the distance between her and the accountant, who was proficient in mathematics and had a unique understanding of business, was very close. However, the appearance of the third prince later made her understand that there was an insurmountable gap between the two of them. After arriving at the capital in less than a day's time, she had already heard many things about him. He was more powerful than she had imagined, and it also made her realize that things were not the same as they had been half a year ago. One was a foreign businessman and the other was the youngest duke in the Jing kingdom. Perhaps even if they met there would not be much to say between them. However, this thought was completely overturned when she saw him. Everything seemed to be the same as half a year ago. At this moment, after learning about these things, she was surprised to feel that the distance between the two of them seemed to be much closer than before. It was as if they suddenly had a common language just like half a year ago. Li Yi turned to look at Lin Wanru and asked, "You just said that the Lin family wants to get involved in industries other than jewelry. Is it true?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "I started preparing a few months ago. This time I came to the Jing kingdom to see more and learn more. I thought it would be best if I could cooperate with you on perfume and ready-made clothes, but I didn't expect." She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. "I didn't expect such a coincidence. Actually, a few days ago I also thought that the business in the Jing kingdom would eventually reach saturation. I also had the idea of expanding these businesses to the Qi kingdom. But after all, it's a neighboring country and the relationship between the two countries is so tense. If the merchants from the Jing kingdom were to go there, I'm afraid that they would encounter a lot of trouble and obstacles." He looked at Lin Wanru wanting to say something but hesitated. How about, the two of them spoke almost at the same time and were stunned at the same time. When they looked at each other, they understood each other's thoughts. "It's a pleasure to cooperate with you." Li Yi smiled and reached out his hand. Lin Wanru also reached out and shook his hand without hesitation. "From now on we're a family. So soon?" Fong opened his eyes wide and looked at this scene in disbelief. The two figures who had just walked into the door of the private room stopped. Wanru watching looked puzzled. Zheng Zimo's eyes stopped on the two for a moment and she asked in a low voice, "Did I disturb you?" Li Yi and Lin Wanru looked back and were slightly stunned. Then they naturally let go of their hands. He shook his head and said with a sincere expression, "No, of course not." Lin Wanru looked at him, then looked at the two girls in front of her and asked, "These two girls?" Li Yi stood up and introduced the two women to her before saying, "This is Lin Wanru, Miss Lin." The three women nodded slightly. Zheng Zimo looked at them and said, "We're just here to take a look. We won't disturb you." Her gaze swept across Li Yi's body, then she left with a smile. "Sorry, I'll leave you for a moment." Li Yi naturally saw the deep meaning in her eyes. He smiled apologetically at Lin Wanru and immediately followed her out. Lin Wanru looked at the figure disappearing at the door and a thoughtful expression appeared on her face. Fong stood to the side and shook his head slightly when he saw the confusion and thought on her face. Somewhere in the brothel in a room on the second floor, seeing Li Yi walk in, Ruoqing quietly left and gently closed the door. The Luo Shui goddess was flipping through a picture book. Li Yi explained, "This is Miss Lin. You don't need to explain anything." Zheng Zimo rolled her eyes and said, "It has nothing to do with me anyway." Li Yi sat beside her and said, "How can it have nothing to do with you? If it weren't for Miss Lin, you wouldn't have seen me a long time ago." Confusion and worry immediately appeared on her face. What happened?" Li Yi briefly told her what happened in the Qi kingdom. If it weren't for her, he and Mississippi Lu would be in a much more dangerous situation. "What about the family you mentioned just now?" "Miss Lin's family is in business. This time I plan to sell perfume and ready-made clothes to the Qi kingdom, so I can only cooperate with Miss Lin. In the future the two families will benefit each other. If we aren't family, what are we?" "Then why are you holding hands?" "It's a kind of etiquette to show that the cooperation has been achieved. Besides, Fong is still here." "How can it be like that?" Zheng Zimo glanced at him and said, "Then why didn't you tell me earlier? You didn't give me a chance just now." Li Yi looked at her and asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Jealous?" She rolled her eyes again. "Who's jealous?" "Don't worry. My relationship with Miss Lin is still very pure. It's not like what you think." Li Yi put his arm around her shoulder and said, "But I quite like it when you're jealous." "I'm not." Her face was a little red. Then, as if remembering something, she hurriedly stood up and said, "Oh no, she's your savior. Was I a little impolite just now? So you know that you were impolite. I thought you... Oh, anyway, it's all your fault." She glared at Li Yi and then quickly ran out. Li Yi shook his head. At this moment she must have gone to cultivate her relationship with Miss Lin. It was not very suitable for him to appear. His business was developing towards the Qi kingdom, and the Lin family was undoubtedly the best partner. However, the specific cooperation methods still needed to be discussed slowly. At least for now, the two of them had reached an agreement. There was still a long way to go. She still had to stay in the capital for a long time, so there was enough time to discuss. There was a pen and paper on the table in the room. Since he had nothing to do, he walked over and sat down, ready to write down some preliminary ideas. This was Ruoqing's room. The room was clean and tidy. There was a thick pile of books on the table, most of which were scripts. On one of the open pages there were her comments. The pleasing hairpin-style small regular script was just like her. At first glance, it gave people a feeling of delicacy and elegance. The ink was still wet, so he couldn't close the book directly. There was no extra space on the table. Li Yi looked around but couldn't find any space. He had to open the drawer next to the table and put the open book in it horizontally. The size was just right. When he closed the drawer, his hand paused and a surprised expression appeared on his face. Then he took out the book again. In addition to the book he took out, there was only a thick booklet in the drawer and some yellowed paper under the booklet. Li Yi subconsciously reached out his hand but stopped in mid-air. Since she put it in the drawer alone, it might be something very secretive or important. He just touched other people's things without their permission. It seemed maybe, not so good. Chapter 844. Li Yi thought about it and decided to close the drawer. If this was Zue Mo's with their current relationship, he might really open it secretly to see if she had scolded him in the diary or if she had any little secrets. But Ruoqing was different. She was so beautiful that he couldn't bear to do anything sinful. The moment he closed the drawer, his eyes inadvertently swept over the yellowed paper at the bottom, and his hands paused again. The paper was a little old and wrinkled, and he could vaguely see some lines and handwriting on it. It was very familiar. Li Yi hesitated for a moment, took out the thick book with a blank cover, put it on the table and carefully took out the paper below. The doubt on his face deepened because the familiar feeling also deepened. The paper was very old. He opened it carefully and the lines and handwriting were clearer. The first thing he saw was a poem written on it. To be exact, it was a word. Delicate clouds play tricks, flying stars spread hatred, the silver river crosses in the dark. It was Immortal Magpie Bridge. When he completely unfolded the paper, the lines gradually took shape. It was a woman in a palace dress, with colorful ribbons flying behind her. Opposite the woman was a man in coarse clothes. In the middle was the Milky Way outlined by a few strokes, and under the feet of the two were countless birds drawn by 2 strokes. It was a meeting on the Magpie Bridge drawn by simple strokes. The words were very ugly and the simple strokes seemed extremely childish to him now, but the words were written by him and the painting was also drawn by him. This was the sky lamp that he and his little maid had personally released on the 7th day of the first year of Jinghe. Later, the sky lamp was picked up by Wan Ruoqing, and this Immortal Magpie Bridge also spread out. The interaction between him and Wan Ruoqing probably began from this sky lamp. It was just that he didn't expect that this thing, which Li Yi himself had long forgotten, would be brought to the capital city by her and kept until now. Li Yi stared at the lines on the paper in a daze for a long time before he folded it again and put it back in its original state. He picked up the book again. When he was about to put it back, he opened it and took a look. It was the first day of the 7th month in the first year of Jinghe. After flipping another page, it was already the 7th of July, and then the 13th of July. This was obviously a diary, and it was not the kind that was recorded every day. As for why it started in July, it might be because she had just finished her previous diary, or maybe she had just developed the habit of writing a diary at that time. This was not important. What was important was that this was her diary. Li Yi only glanced at it and didn't look at it again. He closed it and carefully put it back. If it was some other kind of book, it wouldn't be a big deal to look at it. However, it was somewhat immoral to read someone else's diary after knowing it was someone else's. The few articles that she had accidentally glanced through were nothing more than things that happened in the brothel, or a talented man or woman who had written a good poem at a poetry meet and she copied it down. There was also a prayer lantern that fell from the sky at a certain poetry meet, and it happened to land at her feet with a good poem written on it and something like that. The diary was a very private thing. If there was a woman's worries written in it, it would be inappropriate for him to peek at it again. However, what worries could Ruoqing have? Just thinking about it made his heart itch. Should I look at it again? Just one look? His hand pressed on the diary and his heart was hesitant. Just when Li Yi's mind was a little confused, there were footsteps coming from the door again. Wan Ruoqing gently pushed the door open, and there was a trace of panic on her pretty face. When she saw Li Yi sitting in front of the table and writing something, she finally felt relieved. Li Yi turned around and glanced at her. He pointed to a book on the table. "The page that you just read, I helped you fold it. Next time just find the page with the corner." Wan Ruoqing came over and nodded. "It is a script written by someone. Old Sun thought it was good, so he brought it to me yesterday for me to review." Her eyes inadvertently glanced at the drawer next to the table and then quickly moved away. Li Yi pretended not to notice her gaze. He pointed to the bedside and gestured for her to sit down. Then he said, "How many states are there now that we haven't explored?" "There are 5. Wan Ruoqing did not think too much and gave the answer. "These 5 states are all barren lands. We have sent people there before, but in the end they did not succeed. It doesn't matter. In that case we can just abandon these 5 places." Li Yi shook his head and said, "What do you think if we go to the Qi Kingdom?" Wan Ruoqing said in surprise, "You mean bring our brothel to the Qi Kingdom?" Li Yi nodded. Wan Ruoqing frowned slightly. She thought for a moment and said, "The Qi Kingdom is different from the Jing Kingdom. Far people go there, they will definitely encounter unimaginable obstacles. It's fine if it's just for show, but if it's for gathering information." When it came to the brothel, she became serious. She seriously analyzed the pros and cons of developing the brothel in the Qi Kingdom, and how they should go about it if they really had the idea. Li Yi listened to her while thinking about other things. Since she entered the room, she had glanced at the table 3 times, intentionally or not. Each time her eyes would sweep over the drawer, which meant that there was something important inside. It made her, who had always been steady, panic. Li Yi looked at the blank diary on the bookshelf in his mind. After a long time he let out a long sigh of relief. At the same time his mind moved. The book slowly turned to a page. 2 pages. Countless pages. The 7th day of the 7th month in the 1st year of Jing He. Poems can fall from the sky. I wonder who Li, the one who wrote, "If love lasts for a long time, how can we stay together day and night," is. The 15th day of the 8th month in the 1st year of Jing He. May we live together for a long time. So he is Li Yi. I should have thought of it. I should have thought of it. Jing He. He's actually our neighbor. But he's so talented. Why does he act like a businessman? Oh no, he offended so many people tonight. Will it affect his career? It's all my fault. I shouldn't have gone tonight. He's injured. I don't know if it's serious or not. Thanks to him today, elder son and the others don't have to leave. The sisters also have food to eat. It seems that we owe him too much. His wife is so beautiful. She's a good match for him. Is he going to the capital? When will he come back? He's finally back. He wrote so many poems for Zueyamo. Even Zueyamo herself was shocked. Zueyamo is also. The capital is really big. Can the brothel really open all over the capital and all over the Jing Kingdom in the future? Zueyamo is also here. That's great. She should be very lonely in Qing'an Prefecture. I wonder if he will come today. He should be very happy to see Zueyamo. The expression on Li Yi's face changed. Sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes annoyed, and sometimes worried. The reason why he didn't like to put the handwritten books into his mind was that when he received the information he could clearly feel the emotions of the writer at that time. There was no real empathy in the world, but for Li Yi there was. Although he had never experienced anything like this before, the emotions that were revealed between the lines would be experienced by him in the process. When reading engraved books, such a situation would not occur at all. Therefore he almost completely experienced the emotional journey of Wan Ruoqing in the past 2 years. Of course, he also experienced the emotions hidden between the lines. What's wrong with you? Wan Ruoqing looked at him in a daze. Seeing the change of expression on his face, she asked nervously, "Did I say something wrong?" No. Li Yi closed his eyes. After opening them again, he shook his head and said, "I thought of something myself. The feelings of a young girl were always poems, but the process of writing poems was very difficult to bear. The feeling of having 2 kinds of emotions mixed together was not a good feeling. If he were to read page by page and experience all these emotions again, it would be as if he had experienced a new life. He might even have a split personality." With another thought, the book in his mind turned into spots of light and completely dissipated. At the same time, countless pieces of information surged into his mind. He looked at Wan Ruoqing. Just as he was about to speak, his body suddenly shook. His heart seemed to be clenched tightly with a fist and filled with some kind of emotion. He clutched his chest and gasped for breath. His body trembled and tears rolled down his cheeks uncontrollably. Chapter 845. He came again today. There was no more osmanthus cake. He seemed to be a little disappointed. This autumn he should dry more. Drunkenimo, this silly girl can't hide anything in her heart. She obviously likes him. He should have seen it, right? He was taken away. What should I do? What should I do? There's finally news from the brothel. It's good that he's fine. It's been a month. I wonder how he's doing outside. Those people didn't make things difficult for him, did they? 2 months. For months. God bless, he's finally back. Drunkenimo is also very happy. Seeing her hiding in the room and crying. If it can continue like this, it's really good. This year's osmanthus is very good. He will definitely like it. Drunkenimo, they. It's good that Drunkenimo can have a good home. Li sat there in a daze. Images kept appearing in his mind, and his emotions were no longer under his control. These emotions were what Wan Ruoqing had once felt, and they were also what he was feeling at this moment. Although he had not experienced it personally, for some reason, these emotions and feelings were so real and clear, filling his heart. Joy, grievance, happiness, sadness. All kinds of things were intertwined. In the willow alley, the person standing behind the door and watching the 2 people in the courtyard talking and laughing was her. Outside the brothel, the figure standing at the entrance of the alley and looking into the distance was also her. In front of the window of the small building, watching a figure disappear, she sat there for a long time until night fell. It was still her. She still smiled at him and spoke softly, exactly the same as before. But no one knew the pain in her heart. Wan Ruoqing looked at him, clutching his chest and crying uncontrollably. Her beautiful face had already turned pale. She said anxiously, "What's wrong with you? Is your chest uncomfortable? I'll call the doctor right away." The moment she turned around, Li reached out to grab her wrist and said in a low voice, "I'm fine, don't worry." He had only personally experienced some of the things in her heart. She could even stand here and talk to him without the slightest bit of awkwardness. What could possibly happen to him? Wan Ruoqing's face was still pale. She looked at him and said worriedly, "Then you?" "It's okay. My chest suddenly hurt a little, but it's much better now." Li shook his head and said, "I'm a little thirsty. I'll go get some water." Wan Ruoqing hurriedly got up. There was a glass container and a cup in the corner of the room. Although it was what she usually used, she couldn't care so much at this moment. After pouring a cup of water for him, she quickly walked over. Li picked up the glass of water and drained it in one gulp. Only then did he calm down a little. Wan Ruoqing was still worried. She looked at him and whispered, "Is there really nothing wrong?" Li smiled and stood up. He patted his chest and said, "I'm really fine. Let's go out. They should be done soon." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "You rest here for a while. I'll go find a doctor." "I'm really fine." Li shook his head and said, "When you enter the palace tomorrow, just find a doctor." Wan Ruoqing looked at him a few more times. Seeing that he was really fine, she nodded and said, "You must remember tomorrow. The play is almost over. Let's go." She turned around and prepared to open the door. "Ruoqing." A voice came from behind her. She turned her head and looked at him in confusion. He used to call her Miss Wan, or Miss Ruoqing. After they got to know each other, he didn't call her that. In his memory, he had never formally called her that. Li slowly walked over. He looked at her and said in a low voice, "Can I hug you?" She was startled and didn't believe her ears. She raised her head to look at him. Li opened his arms and took a deep breath. Just for a moment. She looked at the smile on his face and her heartbeat sped up. She clasped her hands together and didn't know what to do. After hesitating for a long time and seeing that he still didn't put his hands down, she slowly opened her arms. Li embraced her and put his hands around her waist. He slowly closed his eyes. Wan Ruoqing opened her eyes. Her heart was beating very fast. She didn't know where to put her hands. After a long time, she finally dared to hold him gently. She carefully looked up and closed her eyes as well. No one knew how long it would be for a moment. Could be as short as the blink of an eye or as long as the world. Li didn't know either. "They're coming." After a long time, Wan Ruoqing finally spoke softly. Li let go of his hands and said, let's go down as well. As for this hug, they tacitly didn't mention it. When he walked out of the building, Zheng Zumo and Lin Wanru also walked over from the opposite side. Goddess Luo Shui glanced at him and asked in surprise, "What happened to your eyes?" Li Yi rubbed his eyes and said, "Nothing. Sand accidentally got in my eyes." "Are you done now? Let me help you blow it." She walked over worriedly and stood in front of him. Just as she stood on her tiptoes, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly moved away with a red face. She whispered, "Is there anything else?" Lin Yong strode over and said, "Men and women shouldn't touch each other. It's not convenient for this lady. Li brothers, do you want me to blow them for you?" "What are you blowing for?" Fong grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "There's sand in my eyes too. Help me blow them." Li Yi looked at her and shook his head gently. "It's fine now." Zheng Zimo nodded and then turned to Lin Wanru. "The other places in the brothel are also quite interesting. Let me show you." "Oi. Thank you, Miss Zheng." Lin Wanru nodded happily. After visiting the brothel and saying goodbye to Zheng Zimo and Ruoqing, it was getting late. Although there were still many places they hadn't been to, there was still a lot of time after today. They were not in a hurry, so they directly returned home. Usually when he had time he would cook by himself. When there were guests coming from afar, cooking a table full of exquisite dishes was the most basic way to treat guests. Lin Yong was dragged out for a drink by Fong. Lin Wanru and Rui were talking in the room. This time Mississippi Lu took the initiative to help in the kitchen. Xiao Huan hid far away when she saw her. Because of what happened last time, she was tied up in the room and spanked by Mississippi Lu. For the past 2 days when she saw Mississippi Lu, she would hide as much as she could. He couldn't, she would pretend to be pitiful. Except for meals, they almost didn't appear together these days. Li Yi didn't regret peeking at Ruoqing's diary. What he regretted was that he directly imprinted it into his mind. His mind was now filled with 2 kinds of emotions. Every time he experienced the other emotion, his nose would sting and tears would flow uncontrollably. "You're crying?" Occasionally, when she raised her head and found that his face was covered in tears, Mississippi Lu's surprised voice came from the side. Li Yi held a wooden shovel in his hand and looked back at her. He shook his head and said, "There's too much smoke, I'm suffocated." In the kitchen, the last soup was boiling. Li Yi washed his face and walked out of the courtyard. Mississippi Lu took something out of her arms and threw it over. "A dagger?" Li Yi caught the thing she threw over. After looking at it, he slowly pulled it out. "This is for you. Use it for self-defense." Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said faintly, "Be careful. This dagger can cut through iron like mud. Don't hurt yourself before hurting others. By the way, there's one more thing. I want the brothel to publicize more chivalrous deeds of martial arts heroes who see injustice on the road. When did you see Miss Wan?" Thinking of another matter, Mississippi Lu had just opened her mouth when she saw Li Yi suddenly with tears in his eyes. She quickly walked over and asked hurriedly, "What's wrong with you?" Li Yi held the dagger and casually wiped his eyes. He held her hand and said in a low voice, "It's nothing. I like the dagger you gave me very much." "Thank you, Rui." Mississippi Lu stared at him blankly. "Just because of this?" Chapter 846. Second Miss, it was all my fault that day. Please don't blame the son-in-law anymore. Xiao Huan walked over with tears in her eyes. She hugged Mississippi Lu's arm and shook it as she spoke pitifully. This was the first time she took the initiative to approach Mississippi Lu in the past 2 days. Mississippi Lu looked back and asked, "How did I blame him?" "I saw it. The son-in-law cried because of you." The servant girl wiped her tears and said, "Second Miss, if you want to blame someone, blame me. You can beat me or scold me. But I've never seen the son-in-law cry before." Mississippi Lu looked back again. There was some hesitation on her pretty face. "It was just a small gift. Did he have to be moved to tears?" As she thought of this, she suddenly realized that she had never given him anything decent. It seemed like she hadn't even given him anything that was not decent. She looked at Xiao Huan and suddenly asked, "Do I treat him badly?" The servant girl nodded. Mississippi Lu frowned slightly. She quickly shook her head. Mississippi Lu's brows relaxed slightly. "It's not very bad. It's very, very bad. In another 2 days it would be the 4th year of Jing He. This year's New Year's Eve would be very lively. Old Mistress had already said that they would spend the New Year's Eve here. This was naturally for the sake of the young master of the Li family. In addition, because Lin Wanru had helped him and Mississippi Lu, Rui now regarded her as half a family member. Naturally, she would participate in the reunion dinner that night. Together with the Duan Wu family, this year's New Year's Eve was naturally different from the previous family of 4. Li Yi lay in the courtyard and basked in the sun. After 2 days, his mood was not affected. He began to read the contents of the notebook word by word. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room. She raised her hand and something flew over. After Li Yi caught it, he was slightly stunned. It was an apple and it was peeled. He didn't quite understand what Mississippi Lu meant. She gave him a peeled apple. Did she mean to peel him? It seemed that other than hiding that matter from her and accidentally barging into her room when she was bathing, he had not offended her in any way, right? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said faintly, "An apple a day is good for your health." Li Yi stood up from the rocking chair and looked at her warily. "What's the matter? Just say it." Mississippi Lu frowned and looked at him. "What do you mean? Are you all right?" Li Yi looked at her suspiciously. "Is this apple poisonous or did you smear laxatives on it? Forget it if you don't want to eat." Second Miss Lu snatched the apple from his hand and took a bite. Then she turned around and left without looking back. Those who were unaccountably solicitous were hiding evil intentions. Especially Mississippi Lu. She actually peeled an apple for him personally. He would never believe that she had no ulterior motives. Fortunately, he had already seen through everything. Li Yi pursed his lips, then looked up and murmured, "It should be about time. Somewhere in the capital city. Miss, the script that we took yesterday. I've already looked through it. The parts that need to be changed have all been marked out. After the changes are made, just bring it to Old Master Sunday. Miss, they want us to arrange more chivalrous plays. Go and tell them that it's already being arranged." Old Master Wu from the north of the city accidentally fell off the stage yesterday and was slightly injured. Old Master Wu has a lot of prestige in the capital city. Go and see for yourself. Remember to get some money from the accountant, don't go empty-handed. When Wan Ruoqing walked out of the brothel, it was noon. In fact, she had formed the habit of eating at this time. She habitually glanced in a certain direction, and when she saw a figure walking over, she was slightly stunned. "What a coincidence." Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "I went to a few shops in the morning. When I passed by the porridge shop, I bought some porridge and vegetables. Have you eaten? Do you want to eat together?" Not yet. It was just a habitual action. She never thought that he would really appear from there. After Wan Ruoqing came back to her senses, she nodded slightly. Li Yi nodded and said, "That's just right. Let's go up and eat together. When I bought it just now, I accidentally bought too much." In the attic on the second floor of the small building, Wan Ruoqing looked at the porridge on the table and asked in confusion, "Why did you buy so much?" Li Yi was stunned for a moment. Then he looked back at Fong and said, "I bought a portion for him, but I didn't know that he had already eaten. It's too much for one person to eat." Fong nodded and rubbed his hungry stomach. He nodded and said, "Yes, when I came here just now, I had already eaten. Tremella lotus seed and 8 treasures porridge, which one do you want?" Li Yi picked up a small bowl and said, "The business of this porridge shop is good and the taste is good. Tremella lotus seed." Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "Yes, I remember when I was a child, there was such a porridge shop not far from my home. But at that time I could only eat it once a month. The taste of this shop is similar to that of my childhood." Actually, she was used to going there to buy some porridge and vegetables in the afternoon. She had planned to do the same today. She didn't expect that there would be such a coincidence. Coincidentally, even those few side dishes were her favorite. "That's a coincidence." Li Yi handed her chopsticks and said, "Let's eat. I have a few ideas about the future development of the brothel. I want to discuss with you." Smelling the fragrance of porridge, Fong swallowed a mouthful of saliva, gently closed the door and went out. Originally he only planned to eat 2 chicken legs, but now he wanted to eat 4. When he bought the porridge shop, he wanted to taste it. Was the tremella lotus seed porridge really so delicious? "I really didn't expect that Lord Singh is already the governor of the capital, but his life is still so frugal. You can eat plain porridge and pickled vegetables with such relish. I really admire you." Singh Shichen, who had moved into the governor's mansion, looked up and casually stretched out his hand, saying, "I'm used to living a luxurious life. Occasionally eating plain porridge and pickled vegetables is also a special flavor. You can sit anywhere you want." After a few words of greeting, Xianxia put down his chopsticks, wiped his mouth and asked, "Brother Cui, you came in person today. Did something big happen?" Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Can't I come here to sit if there is nothing important?" Xianxia only smiled and didn't reply, because he knew that this second-in-command of the Cui family wouldn't come here so easily if there was nothing important. As expected, Cui Qingming said, "Lord Xing was once taught by Grandmaster Chu, so you must understand him very well. What do you think we should do to obtain Grandmaster Chu's full support?" Xianxia raised his brows, then said calmly, "To be honest, if it's Grandmaster Chu, I think it's better to stay put. Rashly roping him in would have the opposite effect." "Why?" Cui Qingming asked with a frown. Xianxia shook his head. 20 years ago, Grandmaster Chu began to travel and give lectures, no longer directly involved in the court affairs. Disturbing him now will only bring disgust. Moreover, Grandmaster Chu has always abided by the ancestral rules and hasn't alienated His Highness all these years. Once something happens, he will definitely support His Highness based on the imperial court and ancestral rules, so there is no need to rope him in. Hearing this, Cui Qingming thought for a moment before nodding and saying, "That makes sense. However, even if that's the case, if we can obtain Grandmaster Chu's full support, we will be able to gain the loyalty of all the officials and regain the support of many court officials. It will be of great significance." Then he sighed and looked at Xianxia. "In the past 2 years, our side has suffered heavy losses in the imperial court. Until now, only Lord Tsang and Lord Chen have been able to go against the current. It is truly rare. Otherwise, our side's morale would really plummet and it would be difficult to recover." Xianxia shook his head. "I was just lucky. There's no need for Lord Tsing to be so modest." Then the two of them discussed a few more matters. A moment later, a few figures walked out of the capital governor's residence. One of them suddenly asked Cui Qingming, "Are we really not going to the Chu residence?" Cui Qingming shook his head. "Although Xianxia's words are reasonable, we still have to go to the Chu residence. His Highness's situation is really not good and we can't keep quiet like this. In the end, you still can't hold it in?" Inside the residence, Xianxia stood in front of the window and shook his head. "Prepare the sedan chair." Chapter 847. On New Year's Eve you are alone at home. It's quite lonely. Why don't you come together? It will be livelier with more people. When Wan Ruoqing was cleaning up the dishes, Li Yi suddenly looked at her and said. Rui had mentioned it to him several times. That day she asked him to pick up Zumo. On New Year's Eve the whole family had to reunite. It didn't make any difference whether it was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. It was better to let them go together so that no one would be lonely at home. Wan Ruoqing was stunned for a moment. She turned her head and said with a smile, "It's not just the few of us. There are many sisters in the brothel who have left their hometown. We have agreed to get together on New Year's Eve. Won't be lonely. By the way, go and talk to Zumo. Zumo should go." "We have agreed." Li Yi heard this, nodded slightly and said, "Let's talk about it later. Will you still be here tomorrow? There are still a few scripts that I want to discuss with you." Wan Ruoqing raised her head and asked him, "Will you come tomorrow?" "Yes." Li Yi said with some embarrassment, "I haven't paid much attention to the matter of the brothel. It's been hard on you. There is nothing urgent recently, so I should help you share some of the burden." Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "It's not that hard." Li Yi shook his head. No one knew better than him whether she was tired or not, but he didn't say much. When he got up and walked out of the door, he waved his hand and said, "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." Wan Ruoqing raised her hand and stood in front of the window. After the figure disappeared, she sat back at the table, opened the drawer, took out the book and turned to the latest page. The 3rd year of Jinghe, the 28th of the 12th lunar month. Next there were some happy things. Downstairs, Fong, who was holding a drumstick in his mouth, was also very happy. He held another drumstick in his hand, shook it in front of the sloppy old man and asked, "Su, do you want one?" The sloppy old man glanced at him and said coldly, "Scram." Fong was not angry. He shook his head and said, "Su, why do you have to do this? It's just a few teeth. You can just pull them out. Is there a need to suffer like this?" Seeing that the sloppy old man was about to flip out, he hurriedly took 2 steps forward and handed over the chicken leg, asking, "Young master, do you want to eat chicken?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "You eat by yourself, I'm full." Fong looked up at the attic and nodded to himself. After such a long time, no matter how hungry the son-in-law was, he should be full by now. In front of the sloppy old man, he took a big bite of the drumstick before quickly catching up with Li Yi and asked, "Young master, do you know what Mars guarding the heart means? Where did you hear about Antares guarding the heart?" Li Yi got on the carriage and casually asked. "When I was buying the drumstick just now, I heard it from someone." Fong replied, "But I didn't really understand what they said." Antares refers to a star in the sky. The heart Antares is also a star in the sky. Antares guarding the heart means that these two stars meet in the sky. Li Yi thought about it and explained. In fact, these two stars were thousands of miles apart and their sizes were trillions of times different. How could they meet? The so-called Antares guarding the heart was just a visual phenomenon. So it's just two stars. Fong curled his lips and put his interest back on the drumstick in his hand. It's not just two stars. Antares is called the Star of Misfortune and Antares represents the Emperor. The meeting of the Star of Misfortune and the Emperor means that the Emperor is in trouble. Antares guarding the heart was actually a kind of astrological geomancy. It was pure nonsense, but in the feudal era many people believed in this. There was a department in the imperial court that specialized in this kind of thing. It was called the imperial astronomer. When they had nothing to do, they would look at the stars and use the astrological signs to predict good or bad luck. Old Fong asked in surprise, "Is that star really that powerful? Is that for real?" Li Yi looked at him snappily. "Of course it's bullsh**. Eat your drumstick." This matter, to put it nicely, was called Antares guarding the heart. To put it bluntly, it was the emperor was in trouble and it was time for him to pass away. Of course, there were so many emperors in the world. Jing Kingdom, Zhao Kingdom, Qi Kingdom, Wu Kingdom. Which one would pass away depended on the luck of these emperors. Li Yi wasn't worried about this. Although the old emperor's body wasn't good, he was now taking good care of himself. He wouldn't pass away so soon. Besides, he didn't believe in this. This was something that Li Yi already knew when he was in Ningguang Fu. Not thinking about this matter, he waved his hand and said, "Let's go home." Fong nodded, wiped the grease off his mouth and asked, "Which home?" In the small courtyard of Willow Lane, Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "I'm not going. I want to stay here with Sister Ruoqing." Li Yi said, "You can go together." She still shook her head. Li Yi looked at her and said, "But you can't live here for the rest of your life." "Why not?" She glanced up at him and said, "I'll stay here. Anyway, with Sister Ruoqing accompanying me, I have things to do every day. No one will bully me." "Who will bully you?" Li Yi looked at her and said after some thought, "Besides, Ruoqing will marry someone one day. What will you do then?" Zheng Zimo was startled. She really hadn't thought about this. Li Yi looked at her and said, "At that time, will you still live here with Xiao Cui?" For some reason, thinking of Sister Ruoqing getting married, she felt particularly uncomfortable. A thoughtful expression appeared on her face and she suddenly looked up at Li Yi and said, "How about you marry Sister Ruoqing as well? The two of us can take care of each other. It's the same no matter where we are." This time it was Li Yi's turn to be startled. Happiness had come so suddenly. So Zheng Zimo was also so reasonable? He thought about it and said, "What you said is not unreasonable." Hiss. "Is it reasonable?" She looked at him with wide eyes. Although she seemed to be smiling, the curve of her mouth was full of danger. "What you said doesn't make sense at all." Li Yi covered the soft flesh on his waist and said, "Have you asked for Ruoqing's opinion?" "Have you asked for my opinion?" She looked at Li Yi and suddenly let go of her hand. She lowered her head and said softly, "Actually, Sister Ruoqing met you before I did, and I can see that she also likes you very much. She just always hides those words in her heart. The two of us have always been together. Seeing her marry someone else, I will also feel uncomfortable. How about, you consider what I just said?" Li Yi shook his head and said seriously, "Don't talk nonsense. It's not good for Ruoqing to hear this. Jumping into a pit once was enough. How stupid was he to fall in the same place twice?" She looked at Li Yi, blinked and then laughed. "Okay, I was just joking. I won't let Sister Ruoqing know. You can't make this kind of joke so casually." Li Yi glared at her and gave her a serious ideological education before leaving in satisfaction. Outside Willow Lane, when he got into the carriage, Fong lifted the curtain and asked, "Young master, which home are we going to this time? To the palace?" Li Yi waved his hand. "No, I'm really going home this time." There were 2 days until the court conference. Her Highness must be very busy. There was nothing urgent, so it was better to go home and celebrate the new year in peace. In the small courtyard, Xiao Cui poked her head out of the room for the first time. Finally, she couldn't help but walk out and say, "Miss, what are you thinking about? It's cold outside. Come inside and think about it." After a few calls, Zheng Zimo finally realized and nodded. "Yes, go in." She stood up, but her body suddenly fell to the side. Xiao Cui hurried to support her and said with concern, "Miss, what's wrong? Don't move, don't move." Her voice was a bit panicked. "Stand there and don't move, my feet are numb." Chapter 848. Brother Cui, Brother Qin, what brings you here today? A middle-aged man came out to welcome them. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "It's cold outside. Come in." It's been a long time since Grandpa Chu left the capital. Cui Qingze walked forward and asked with a smile, "Is Grandpa Chu well?" The middle-aged man nodded. "The old man has always been healthy." Cui Qingze smiled. "Grandpa Chu is 70 years old, but he's still so healthy. He's truly a national treasure. You two young fellows, it's not even the new year yet. Why are you here so early?" The two had just stepped into the room when an elderly voice came from ahead. An old man with a head full of white hair and a face like a withered pine tree looked up at the two of them and asked, "Is Qin Yin well?" "Greetings, Grandpa." Qin Chong stepped forward and bowed before saying, "My father's health is fine, but he tends to forget things. He's been recuperating at home for the past 2 years." The old man shook his head and said, "He was already weak when he was young, unlike Qin Wen and Shen Ku. Sai, let's not talk about it. Tomorrow is the first day of the Lunar New Year. Why are you here today?" After Cui Qingze bowed, he smiled and said, "We're worried that too many people will come to the Chu Manor after the first day and we won't be able to see Grandpa Chu. As such, we came early to pay our respects." "You're quite eloquent." The old man glanced at him and said, "Have a seat." After the two of them sat down, the old man put down his scroll and asked, "I heard that the imperial court is planning to build academies in the various provinces to allow poor students to study for free?" Cui Qingze was taken aback and nodded. "That's true. When the previous emperor was still alive, I mentioned this many times, but it was delayed with the excuse that the treasury was tight. When has the treasury not been tight?" The old man glanced at the two of them and said, "Who came up with this idea to get these people to raise money? It's simply brilliant." Cui Qingze's expression was awkward. He didn't feel good listening to this. He had come today to say that the princess's governance was against etiquette, but he hadn't expected Grandpa Chu to praise the princess before he could say anything. He could only nod and say, "It was Her Highness who came up with this idea. It's that little girl." The old man nodded and said, "I've heard about what she's done in the past 2 years. She's not bad, but it's a pity that she's a woman." Cui Qingze's eyes lit up and he immediately said, "Yes, although Her Highness has both ability and integrity, she is still a woman. In the future, this great undertaking will still fall on the shoulders of some prince." The old man shook his head and repeated, "What a pity, what a pity." Cui Qingze suppressed the joy in his heart and said, "Presently, the emperor is unwell and the princess has the ability to manage on his behalf. This is, of course, a good thing. However, Jingdo still needs a suitable prince just in case. What do you think, Master Chu?" The old man glanced at him and said, "You mean the king of Shu? Don't think that I don't know what he's done just because I'm traveling outside. The virtuous king forcing me to abdicate? Turning into a dragon in the face of a storm? If I was in Jingdo at the time, I would use this walking stick to crack his head open and ask him who taught him all this nonsense." The old man picked up the walking stick beside him and knocked it against the ground. "The emperor is already exceptionally merciful by not chopping off his head." Cui Qingze was momentarily at a loss for words. After a long time he said, "Master Chu, you don't know, but His Highness was framed by someone. He would certainly not do such a thing." "Fine, fine." The old man waved his hand and said, "No matter what, he is the emperor's eldest son and has the right of the ancestral system. I only hope that in Shuzhou he can properly reflect on himself and not make mistakes. If he can turn over a new leaf and has virtuous officials at his side to assist him, it's not impossible for him to become a wise ruler." This was a very clear stance. Cui Qingze knew that although Master Chu was angry at His Highness's foolish actions, his stance had not changed. He hurriedly said, "His Highness has been diligently studying every day in Shuzhou, quietly reflecting on his mistakes. It has already been a year and he is no longer the same as before. He will definitely not disappoint Master Chu's expectations. His tone changed as he said, however, His Majesty's body is seriously ill, the court is in chaos and there are treacherous officials causing chaos. His Majesty has also delayed summoning His Highness back to the capital. The old man did not wait for him to finish. With a wave of his hand he interrupted him. The court is in chaos? Why do I feel that the court is in a rare moment of clarity in the past few decades? As for treacherous officials, His Majesty's numerous actions this year have already gotten rid of many of the treacherous officials in the court. How can there be treacherous officials causing chaos? Cui Qingze opened his mouth, but he suddenly did not know what to say. Qin Chong took a sip of tea and quietly savored the Chu estate's fragrant tea. Does Master Chu know that several days ago, there was a warning of the Antares guarding the heart phenomenon? The Antares guarding the heart is greatly detrimental to the emperor and is a sign of treacherous officials causing chaos in the government. That Marquis of Chang'an Li Yi is the only one who is favored by His Majesty. The Antares guarding the heart. His Majesty does indeed live up to these words. The old man nodded, then shook his head. But the Antares guarding the heart is only detrimental to the emperor. There is no intention of treacherous officials causing chaos in the government, right? But, could it be that the Directorate of Astrology has come up with a new theory of astrology? Cui Qingze, Master Chu, this junior will take his leave. A moment later Cui Qingze and Qin Chong stood up, bowed to the old man surnamed Chu and turned to leave. After watching the two leave, the middle-aged man turned to look at the old man and asked, "Father, why did you?" The old man looked at him and said, "What you hear may be false, but what you see is true. The Chu family has 100 years of good reputation. It is extremely difficult to build a tree, but it is extremely easy to destroy it. Remember this." The middle-aged man bowed respectfully. This child has learned his lesson. Li Yi. The old man murmured, then yawned. I'm tired. If there's anything, let's talk when I wake up." In front of the Chu residents, Cui Qingze took a deep breath and calmed his emotions with great difficulty. Qin Chong shook his head and said, "The outcome is already very good. At least Master Chu was willing to say those words. At the critical moment he will definitely speak up for His Highness." Still not enough. Cui Qingze let out a long sigh and murmured. What he wanted was not what Grand Tutor Chu said, but what he did. If this scholar of the Jing Kingdom was willing to take a clear-cut stand on their side, it was equivalent to them obtaining the support of all the scholars in the world at the same time. How could the effect be compared to a mere sentence? As if thinking of something, Cui Qingze asked again, "Is Antares guarding the heart really not a treacherous official who wants to disrupt the government?" Qin Chong thought for a moment, then said, "Brother Cui, when you go back you might as well read more books." "Uncle Cui, Uncle Qin." A voice came from ahead. Cui Qingze turned his head and saw the newcomers. He smiled and said, "Oh, it's Chu Ping. Why didn't you visit the estate this time?" Chu Ping said somewhat embarrassedly, "I plan to visit in a few days." After greeting the two, Chu Ping entered the estate while Qin Chong and Cui Qingze got on the carriage. Cui Qingze glanced at the Chu estate and said, "I heard that Chu Ping has been spending a lot of time with that child from the Wei family recently?" Qin Chong looked at him and his eyes flickered. Then he nodded slowly. "They have been getting closer recently." Cui Qingze patted his robes and smiled. Getting closer is good, getting closer is good. Chapter 849. I'm here. Brother Cui, farewell. Farewell. After bidding farewell to Cui Qingze, Qin Chong returned to the estate and went straight to his study. He picked up a brush, thought for a moment and then switched the brush to his other hand. He wrote a few lines, put it into an envelope and sealed it with clay. He raised his head and asked, "What is third young lady doing?" The servant girl at the door immediately replied, "Young lady is bathing and will be going out in a moment." These past years, if he had not taken the initiative to accompany her out to relax, Miao Yu would not have so easily left the estate. But these days she was going out almost every 2 days. Qin Chong naturally knew where she was going. He put the envelope in his sleeve and lightly said, "When Miao Yu comes out, let me know." "Yes." The servant girl lightly replied. Qin Chong returned to his desk and casually took out a book. After flipping through it, he murmured, "Antares guarding the heart." In a street in the capital. A woman carrying bags of various sizes turned her head and smiled. Young lady, you treat these children so well. No wonder they often talk about you. Wan Ruoqing also carried some things. She smiled. They have no parents and usually come to the brothel to help out. Tonight is New Year's Eve, so it's only right to send some things over. This year, everyone is celebrating at the brothel. Why don't we also call them over? The more people there, the livelier it will be. The place where the two of them were at was not in the downtown area, but in the poor residences of the capital. A dozen or so steps behind them, there were several figures following from a distance. The woman nodded. If these children are here tonight, it will definitely be more interesting. The two of them came to the front of a small courtyard and knocked on the door. Soon, the sound of cheerful footsteps could be heard from within. When the door opened, a little girl with 2 pigtails appeared. Seeing them, she said in pleasant surprise, "Elder sister Ruoqing, you've come." The woman beside her pretended to frown and said with dissatisfaction, "You only see elder sister Ruoqing?" The little girl immediately put on a look of pleasant surprise and widened her eyes. "Elder sister Xiaolu, you've come too." Wan Ruoqing stooped down, touched her little head and said, "Xiaobei, you're wearing very beautiful clothes today and your hair is also very beautiful. Did sister Xianxia comb it for you?" Hearing elder sister Ruoqing praise her clothes and braid, the little girl was even happier. Her eyes curved into crescent moons as she hurriedly said, "It's not elder sister Xianxia. Elder sister Xianxia wouldn't comb such beautiful braids. It's big brother who did it for me. The beautiful clothes were also given to us by big brother." Big brother. Wan Ruoqing's face was filled with confusion. Sister Ruoqing is here. A burst of cheerful voices came from the room and a few figures immediately ran out. They were all children. The oldest was 12 or 13 years old, and the youngest was only 6 or 7 years old. When they saw Wan Ruoqing, their faces were full of surprise and excitement. Of course, there were also older ones. Li Yi walked out of the room with a little girl holding his hand. When he saw Wan Ruoqing, he was surprised for a moment before he smiled and said, "What a coincidence. Elder sister Ruoqing, the candied plums that big brother gave us are so delicious. Try one." The girl named Xiaobei ran out of the room and put a candied plum in Wan Ruoqing's hand. After thinking about it, she ran in and took another for Li Yi before running away again. Li Yi threw the candied plum into his mouth and said, "Yesterday I heard from elder son that these children are lonely and helpless. It's not easy for them to support themselves in the brothel. It's almost the new year, so I came to see them. They're all poor children." Wan Ruoqing looked at the figures running around in the yard with a smile on her face and said, "When they grow up, I can teach them some things. In the future, they won't have to worry about living in the brothel." Li Yi knew that she had lived a hard life since she was a child. After experiencing those hardships, she would be full of pity for people who had the same experience or worse situation. Of course, it was not pure pity. Even the porridge at the door of the brothel would be earned by the beggars through their own labor. Now the beggars in the capital no longer had to worry about not having enough to eat. For those who were willing to work hard, they even had extra money. Not to mention that there were no beggars in the capital, but the life of the beggars in the capital was undoubtedly much better than that of the beggars in other places. Tonight was New Year's Eve and both of them had many things to do. After seeing the children, they walked back together. "I've been thinking about it for the past few days. If we want to extend our brothel to the Qi Kingdom, it's not impossible. However, we first need to nurture some trustworthy people there." On the way, Wan Ruoqing mentioned the matter that he had mentioned a few days ago. He shook his head and said, "If it's only one prefecture, it'll be easier. However, if it's the entire Qi Kingdom, it'll be a huge obstacle. This matter is not so urgent." Li Yi shook his head and said, "In fact, the Jing Kingdom is already big enough. If we expand further, it may be out of control. For the time being, let's take it one step at a time." The two of them talked for a while and they could already see the brothel in front. "Get out of here. You've dirtied my clothes. Can you afford to pay for it?" A harsh voice suddenly sounded in front of them. Li Yi turned his head and saw a luxuriously dressed young man holding the hem of his clothes. He looked at the beggar who had fallen on the ground with a look of disgust and was about to leave. Please save my child. He's very sick. Please, I beg you." A woman in ragged clothes knelt on the ground. She was holding a little girl of 4 or 5 years old tightly in her arms. The little girl's eyes were closed and her face was dirty. One could still see that she was pale. Get out of here, get out of here. I'm not a doctor. How can I save her? The young man looked at her with disgust again. He suddenly tore off his clothes and walked away quickly. The woman was dragged to the ground, but she still held the little girl tightly. Her eyes were lifeless and she kept murmuring, "Save her, save her. She's only 5 years old. She's only 5 years old." Seeing a white figure walk in front of him and walk away quickly, Li Yi smiled and slowly followed. Wan Ruoqing walked over and bent down to look at the woman. She asked with concern, "Aunt, what happened?" The woman looked up at her. Just as she was about to open her mouth, her eyes suddenly widened. Her body trembled and she couldn't speak. Wan Ruoqing looked surprised. "Auntie, auntie." Li Yi squatted down beside her and reached out to touch the little girl's forehead. He turned back and said to Fong, "The little girl has a fever. Time is urgent. Take her to see a doctor first." Fong strode over and wanted to take the child from the woman's arms. However, he found that the child was held tightly by the woman. He said helplessly, "Sister-in-law, the child is important." The woman finally came back to her senses. She hurriedly let go of the child, but she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly, "Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam." Go. Fong picked up the child, looked at her and strode out of the crowd. The woman stood up, looked deeply at Wan Ruoqing and quickly disappeared into the crowd. After the crowd dispersed, Li Yi shook his head and said indignantly, "I was the one who helped her. Why did she only thank you?" Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "Maybe that aunt was too anxious just now." Recalling the scene just now, Li Yi said in surprise, "Why did she call you madam?" Wan Ruoqing shook her head and murmured, "She must have mistaken me for someone else." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "It's also possible that she mistook you for Goddess Guanyin." Wan Ruoqing was stunned, and then a trace of panic appeared on her pretty face. She shook her head repeatedly and said, "How can I compare to Goddess Guanyin? You can't say such things carelessly." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Goddess Guanyin saves people from suffering and delivers all living beings from suffering. Our Miss Ruoqing is also kind-hearted and saves people from danger. How can we not compare?" Hearing him say, "Our Miss Ruoqing," Wan Ruoqing blushed. She lowered her head and hurriedly said, I'll go in first." Li Yi looked at her back as she left in a panic. He smiled and slowly followed her. On the street, the old man supported by the middle-aged man knocked the ground with his crutch and asked, "Is that the sycophant?" The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Yes, he is Li Yi." The old man turned his head and looked in the direction where the young man had left and asked, "That bastard just now, whose family is he from?" The middle-aged man had a complicated expression and said in a low voice, It seems he is from a branch of the Cui family."